Purity culture is, at its heart, all of these things are inappropriate until you are a wife. And then you completely have to flip a switch. Completely. And you suddenly are expected, nay, commanded, to be okay with any and all physical intimacy. Because it is what you're supposed to do. Because you are supposed to go forth and lie with your husband and multiply and be comfortable with this. And that is damaging in a way that I don't even have words for.
Hi there, thank you so much for joining me. I'm Hecate, and this is Finding Okay, a healing podcast for survivors of sexual assault and any and all abuse. Today, I'm joined by Kaitlin Bellamy. Kaitlin is a professional actor, young adult fantasy author, and a variety streamer currently living in Orlando, Florida. She is an autistic, polyamorous chaos witch with a specialization in cozy comfort vibes and making other people feel safe. Kaitlin is also an ex-Mormon and a survivor of an abusive marriage. I'm honored to have her as a guest, and today we'll be talking about what it was like for her growing up in the Mormon Church and how purity culture contributed to the abuse in her marriage. And now it's time for... Trigger and content warnings for this episode include the following: sexual assault, rape, trauma, abuse, PTSD, cancer, death, religion, spirituality, and purity culture. Please check in with yourself and make sure you're all right to continue.
So you were saying your 10-year anniversary of your divorce is coming up.
Yeah, my 10-year anniversary of my divorce from my first husband is coming up in just like 2 weeks. And I spent 9 of those 10 years very afraid of the repercussions of talking about any of this. And afraid of what my husband might say or do because we were keeping each other's secrets from whatever. And I was talking on my Facebook about how I was done being afraid. And it was unfair that the purity culture we'd been raised in had put us in this position where I was supposed to stay quiet about any of this. And someone said I had to look up purity culture. Jesus Christ, I have questions. I was like, I'm so glad you had to look that up. Like, I'm so glad you didn't know already firsthand what this life is like and what the burden of you're only worthy if this does to people. I'm very glad that some of my friends don't know that life. But yeah, so I've been telling people that this was coming because the last time I spoke up, everything got really, really toxic and bad very fast. And I went quiet for like a year again. And I was like, well, it's time. Let's go. So here we are. It's time. Let's go.
No, I'm so happy that I could be a part of that. So it's an honor.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited.
I'm sorry, I just like jumped into stuff.
No, it happens. It happens. Yeah.
Comfort candle.
Yay! I love the boot candle.
I like comfort candle.
I love that it's in a boot.
It's their witch boots, and they're from Yankee Candle, and I gave one to my mom and one to me because while Christmas is my favorite holiday, my mom and I had this thing where I like decorating for Halloween most. So we collected all these really cute like Halloween decorations, and so they had these little boots, and I bought them, one for her and one for me. So one I have somewhere in the house for my mom that I took after she passed, and the other one I have that's mine that lives here. So I I have a lot of those little family things. So like that candle, I have water. I have the ability to go get snack. My husband went and got my comfort foods from the store earlier. Bless the man.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, he's very kind.
Nice.
So.
Should we start with a floof the booth?
Floof the booth!
Floof the booth.
Yeah, floof the booth. I love you. Good,
Awesome.
amazing.
Yay!
I love that. Thank you for liking the. I sort of tongue in cheek put the thing about this and this with a hero complex, but it's very true. Like
Oh,
in my bio, like
yeah,
it's very true.
No, I think your bio is perfect. I think it's perfect. I love it. I love it. All right. So, are you okay?
So there are times when I completely think that I am. I will go months at a time without thinking about, I will have months go by where I forget that I was ever religious, when I forget that I was ever in a first marriage, that I forget he existed, and I forget who I used to be. And then suddenly these triggers will pop up and I'll like spiral out even harder than before. And I'll go, oh no, I was just masking very well. I compartmentalized too well. Or I'll think I'm fine and then suddenly something will hit out of nowhere unexpectedly and I'll go, oh my God, and I'll just suddenly not be okay for like days at a time when I didn't expect that, when I thought everything was normal and I was over stuff or like nothing bothered me anymore. So yes and no.
No,
honestly.
Highly relatable.
Yeah, I can say I'm finally in a place where for a really long time the idea of being a tragic broken person was like half of my personality, and the fact that I'm now in a place where I want to move past that and heal and be better, where I want to not have that be the thing people know about me, is huge for me actually, though. Like that is very big for me. And so that to me is a big step forward and makes me feel like I'm gonna be okay. More than 10 years ago when like,
That was big truth. And I really appreciate you just like putting your finger right on that.
Thank you. Okay, good,
no,
amazing.
I love that. No, it's because I think that's something that that I think a lot of people experience, but then have a lot of shame about and don't feel like they're allowed to admit that might be a part of the healing process of
it's very hard,
of like getting sucked into that identity and identifying with that. And I think it also doesn't help that the outsiders shame that a lot. And use that to be invalidating. And so we have to deny it, which means we can't own it, which means we can't move forward or fix it.
Exactly.
And it's just this vicious cycle, and it's fucked up.
It's really terrible.
First F-bomb of the
Woo, yes! I'm gonna fucking swear. Hey, if you're in my family or you're anyone from church growing up, you knew what this was. And I will not apologize for any of the things that I say here today. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
Cool.
And I would love to hear a compliment that you've received and never forgotten.
Unfortunately, this ties into question one a little. So I struggle to remember or accept compliments that are about me as a person rather than my art or like my skills or like what I do. It's a struggle for me. Like most of the like my initial reaction to this question is always like, oh my God, it was this thing about my writing or this thing about my acting. No, that's not about me. That's about the stuff I do. And while those are very important to me, unfortunately, one of the compliments that has stuck with me the longest and like is part of my core personality, it's core memory, is that I am able to smile and function through any level of pain. Like that is the idea that, oh my God, you're so perky and bubbly. None of us had any clue you were going through all of this trauma. Like, I've always gone through shit. I've always been in like, I've dealt with more in my small life than a lot of people have in twice the years. And the first time it became really, really clear to me was when I was in college, and it was freshman year of college, and we had a stress specialist come in to talk to all of us. And I had already been diagnosed with a chronic stress disorder that had put me in the hospital 2 years previously. I already knew that I was extracurricular girl. I was still gets good grades and is in 90 shows and teaches and works, like kind of person. And I was proud of myself for taking on everything. And this man, this stress specialist, listens to my life and goes, you may need to schedule an actual appointment with me. And I was like, why? And he goes, because I would not, looking at you, know that you were going through anything. And I think you're holding it in too much. And I heard that as, oh my God, you're right. I'm so good at this. Like, because I've been hearing it for a long time. It's unfortunately been said to me a lot of like, you're so good at like pushing past and pushing through and like doing all these things despite whatever hell is going on. And I know they meant it as a compliment. And I know it is technically a compliment. But unfortunately, it adds to that hero complex thing of mine where I'm like, I can save the world if my leg's falling off. It's fine. So it's not super great, but I've embodied that a lot. Dang. I know.
That's intense.
And again, like I laugh through it because I have to, because that's my whole personality. There are parts that I love about myself. But I could definitely find healthier ways to deal with it. And it should not have become as much a part of my core being as it has.
Wow.
Welcome.
Yeah, no, that was a very real answer. I love it.
Thank you.
And I think that's also going to be very relatable for quite a few people, because that is something that is valued, especially in femmes.
Yeah.
The ability to, I mean, everybody, but
yeah.
But yeah, the grin and bear it kind of mentality is definitely highly valued and requested, even if it's just subconsciously or silently requested. Definitely. So what is your favorite color or color combination, and what do you associate with it?
So I love, it's taken me a long time so it's essentially the colors that are on my tattoo. It is the purple, blue, and pink. Essentially anything you would see in cyberpunk bisexual lighting on film. Like, it's that purple, pink, blue neon combo. I've realized as I'm big into color theory, as far as helping me focus, like I will color coordinate my notes and my whatever with like this color. I also have synesthesia. So like this color is actually associated with a certain feeling for me or a certain idea for me. So I've actually broken this down quite a lot with, I started associating this color combination originally with like the cyberpunk superhero aesthetic that I strove to be. Like all these like really cool, like badass women I was looking up art for stories or character references or whatever. I was like, I love this color theme. I gotta love it. But when I broke it down a little, so like it was not only who I aspired to be, but each of those colors represents a part of who I am or was. The pink for my overly large, bubbly personality. It's often too big or too bright for people. So is like neon hot pink. Like it's a very abrasive color. I am a very bubbly, abrasive person. There's a reason why Pinkie Pie is pink. She loud. It's a loud color, and I love that about it. In addition, the purple is what I associate with my internal magic and my witchy side. I have associated those purples with my own magic for a long time. And then the blues, when I was a kid, the blue was my favorite color. I did the typical girl thing of paint the walls this color of blue, and like I went through a like deep ocean phase and like all the shades of blue. I loved them all. And so for me, the blue is still that connection to my inner child and my like childhood and my parents and specifically my relationship with my parents and who I was as a child. So like those three as a whole now have just become so much of my aesthetic. Like any clothes with those colors on give. Any time that I'll walk through and there's a like even in my Twitch background, it's these purples with the hints of blue and the pink and everything, and my little lights. Oh yeah, I had this little neon light, the little Saturn planet one that's like pink and blue neon. And I just I've accepted absolutely that I like color, and I was in that I'm too cool for colors, I'm just gonna wear black all the time phase because I felt like I was supposed to be for a long time, and I was like, nah, I like bright neons and jewel tones. I'm going to accept that.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, I made my little moonlight purple for you.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Yeah, purple is very good. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think you're our first guest with synesthesia.
Oh, I'm discovering a lot of synesthesia things that I have. I did not realize how much of my magic system in my books is just synesthesia. Like, and how much of it's just related to how I actually see the world, and I wrote it in a way other people could understand, with like smells triggering certain things and sounds and all of these things. Like, that's big for me. The I can smell rain thing, and not just that, it unlocks a lot of things that are like, oh, well, it smells like this color and it feels like this sound, and it, like, all of these things are just very tied together.
I've actually I've been getting the question a lot, like, do you have synesthesia? Because some of the things that you say makes me think that you do. And I'm like, no, I don't. And then I took a quiz and I was like, okay, maybe I do.
Yeah, it might. It's just like, because it's not a diagnosable thing. It's one of those things where you look and you go, huh, oh, that makes sense to me. Not everyone does that. Yeah, I just gravitated toward people who did that.
Colors relating to certain days of the week, or like all this stuff where I was like, oh, I thought other people did, you know, or like music having shape or color.
Yes.
And it's like, does it?
I just thought it was because I watched Fantasia too much as a kid. Fantasia, like I had.
I'm like, well, of course it goes with me.
Exactly. You can picture that. Exactly. I had a voice teacher, though, before this word existed or any of us knew what it was. A voice teacher, my first vocal coach, figured out, because I was like a little flatter, a little sharp, and he was like, what do you see in your head when you hear sounds? I was like, color. He was like, interesting. And like, he broke down what every tone, what color they were in my head. Mm-hmm. And he would hold up a color card and I would automatically adjust. Nice. Like, it was like, I should have known then. I should have known when I was 14.
That's
like,
spot on. Yeah.
It was brilliant of him, though. Like, he was like, this sound is yellow to you. So like, and he would like hold up a yellow card and my brain would adjust to hit the proper note.
Yeah.
And it was so like, and I thought nothing of it. I was like, he's a genius. He tapped into my childhood love for Fantasia. There's clearly something there with color theory. It wasn't until I was deep in the pandemic TikTok spiral where I went, what the fuck is synesthesia? Oh my God, I have it. Like, I have like 7 kinds of that. What the fuck? Like,
that's so cool that you had a teacher that was willing to like meet you there and actually break down like that level of accommodation for neurological.
Even when he didn't understand, neither of us understood what I had or what I was. Neither of us knew. He just saw a tool and a possibility in this student, and he like ran with it. I was like, love the man.
Yeah. That's somebody who's like made to be a teacher. Oh, I love that. I love those
wonderful.
People. Yeah.
It was wonderful.
Groovy.
Yeah.
Groovy. Yeah. So if I had to summon you in a ritual, what 5 things would I need to place as offerings at each point of the pentacle on the floor?
Oh, anything having to do with foxes.
Okay.
Just anything. It used to be anything having to do with dragonflies. I have shifted. Anything having to do with foxes. Glitter. Just hard, just glitter.
Just a pile of glitter.
I like to sparkle. Get creative with it. Anything Christmas related. I have permanently paper snowflakes above my desk. My tree is still up downstairs. Christmas makes me warm and fuzzy in the whole soul. And I will just show up. I'll be like, 24-hour Christmas store, bam, I'm here. What's up? Like, I'll just show up. Notebooks and fancy pens that I will never actually use will instead be relegated to the shelf of too nice until I have exactly the right story for them. I will love and adore them, but I will not waste them on subpar ideas. And anything to add to my Tinkerbell collection. A Tinkerbell item I don't already have, I'll just show up. Like, what, where, give. Like, what do you need? You need me to kill somebody? That's fine. Can I have that? Pretty. Yeah, I have the wings. Obviously.
It's perfect.
It's perfect.
I love it.
Yeah.
What's your favorite kind of Christmas lights?
Oh my God, I like colored Christmas lights. I don't necessarily need them to twinkle. I just like when they're bright and colorful. Inside. Inside, I like bright, colorful. Outside, I like pale blue.
Gotcha.
Because those lights feel cold to me.
Yeah.
That color feels cold. Yeah, exactly. No. So that color makes me feel cold, and so I need them to be outside so that even if it's not snowing, it feels colder and winterier outside. Especially because I live in Florida now, where we don't have weather. We just have hell.
Oh, you have weather. It's just
not real weather.
Like
it's a trap.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the bright, like the pale icicle blue. I don't like bright white. I don't like the yellow white. I don't like colored lights outside. I like pale blue outside. Mm-hmm. And like they will put those icicle lights on Cinderella's castle at Magic Kingdom, and I'm like, I'm just gonna stand here and look at them. Look how pretty they are. But then indoors, I need bright colors. Like, you try to put white lights on my tree, I'll kill you. You give me colored lights on this tree, not the big bulbs, the little ones, little colored, multicolor. Go.
I like it.
Yeah,
no, I'm the same, and like the only time that I will be down for like white lights or like that one, color kind of thing indoors is if it's some lunatic that has multiple trees like that are themed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and this is my gold tree, and this is my white tree, and this is my color tree, and I'm just like,
no, that's
for your insanity.
That's fair. I recently I did buy a pre-lit tree several years ago with like, it had like white flocking because I was a live tree girl forever, and then I had some weirdly specific live tree related trauma, and I had to get a fake tree to stop myself from having a panic attack. Doesn't matter. But I was like, you know what? If it's gonna be a fake tree, it should look fake, because too many of them are trying to look real and they don't. So if I'm gonna get a fake tree, I'm gonna get one that's covered in flocking for snow. It's just gonna be covered, because I might as well. Like, it's I might as well make it something extra that I wouldn't normally have on a real tree. So I got this pre-lit tree with white lights in the flocking though, so it looked like the snow was glowing. And then I still put colored lights on the tree anyway. I just had both lights. It glowed white from the inside, and then I put colored lights on. And poor Cody was like, it's pre-lit, so you didn't have to put the work in. And I was like, you want to fight me? It's pretty now. I'll go. You want me to go buy another tree that has the colored lights on it? It'll be twice as much. I was compromising.
No, it's extra. You're welcome.
Exactly. And since then, the pre-lighting has died, and I put false lights on it every year anyway. So, like, it's fine. But like, that was the one exception for like the white lights, and because then I still added color to them, and the whole thing just shimmered. It's beautiful. I'll send you a picture of my tree later. I'm very proud of it. I love it. I'm obsessed.
Yeah,
it's 9 feet tall. It's 9 feet tall because I have a 10-foot ceiling downstairs.
Oh, nice.
It's huge. I've decorated it on stilts before. Like when I was learning how to stilt walk, and I had someone's stilts in my closet. I put them on.
Awesome.
I got them. My life is weird.
That's one I haven't heard before, and I am here for it.
I also have pictures of that somewhere.
Awesome. And I would love to hear 3 essentials to your self-care.
They're all 3 pretty simple. It is fall or winter scented candles, because I am a weather witch. And I am in the best mental state in fall and winter, and so I figured out several years ago that I could hack my emotional state into being better when I had fall and winter scented things in spring, which I have weird seasonal depression where spring makes me miserable. I hate it. I'm sad all the time for like 4 months. So fall and winter scented candles. The candle next to me right now is this like kitchen spice one that has like cinnamon and cloves and like pumpkin and all that stuff in it. It's July. It's fine. Cheese, just full stop. Like charcuterie board cheese.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It's my favorite food is charcuterie boards. So like, just bring me and I'll be happy. And then comfort TV and movies to turn off my brain. Because oftentimes my own thoughts get in the way of my self-care. And so turning that off by being like, let's watch My Little Pony for the 90th time. Let's watch Gilmore Girls for the 80th time. Let's fall deep into a Friends binge, despite the fact that we're aware of how problematic it is. It's just, I know it, so my brain can... Yeah.
I rewatched it recently, and I was
it's bad.
Oh, shit. Like,
it's so bad.
Damn. I grew up with it, and I have like a big like me coming into like, oh, I can be quirky but also have friends and be loved was Phoebe. And so I did a lot of like mimicry with Phoebe. That was a big masking trait where I was like, oh, like I can't pass as normal, so here's a way to be abnormal but accepted, apparently.
Yeah, exactly.
And
side note, I learned yesterday because the algorithm found me and was like, she's rewatching Friends. Let's push some Friends content. Do you know that Lisa Kudrow was actually pregnant when when Phoebe's character was having the triplets?
Yeah.
Like, she was actually pregnant with her son, and I didn't know that. I was like, what? That's delightful. That's delightful to me.
It is. I love it when they write pregnancy in and figure out ways to do that rather than
me too.
Just like this character is inexplicably carrying large blankets around.
We've got a blanket. Exactly. In How I Met Your Mother,
like a whole 9 months of this show.
In How I Met Your Mother, Lily was pregnant the second time. They wrote in her second or one of they wrote in her pregnancy or first pregnancy earlier than planned to try to like justify her doing that because she did that for a little bit. But then in How I Met Your Mother, nope, that's what I just said. In Big Bang Theory, Bernadette's second pregnancy was the actress actually got pregnant, and it was unplanned. So they wrote in this, how did you get pregnant again so fast? I don't know. Because the actual actress got pregnant, and they were like, oh no, she can't hide it. She's 4 feet tall. She'll just, we can't hide this. So they like gave her.
We got nowhere to go.
Yeah, there's nowhere to hide. It would be my whole body. I'm short. Yeah. So that's always fun for me. But yeah. So those 3 things.
Gotcha. Yeah. No. And I was actually going to ask about the comfort shows. So I'm so glad that you told me. I do that too.
I play a game with friends because my mom bought me 2 things. She got me the full Friends set once. And she got me the full Gilmore Girls set. Because that was our show. That was me and my mom's show. But with the Friends one, I used to just watch the DVDs on repeat. And I love to play a game called What Lines Did They Cut for the Netflix Release? Because there are whole scenes that have been cut to the bare bones that were on the DVD release that are not in any other version. And I'm like, I'm not crazy. This was an actual scene that happened.
I had no idea.
It's hilarious. And I knew these DVDs so well that I would like go to quote something and it would just be cut from the scene. And I'm like, what? What? Did I just Mandela affect myself? No. And I went back and watched. I'm like, it's there. Like,
yeah.
It's hilarious. And every now and then Cody will watch me watching it and I'll just like say a line that's supposed to be there. And he's like, how do you do that? I was like, I don't know. It takes up so much space in my brain. I can't get rid of it. Like, it's just there.
Well, it's like a song, and then they re-release it, or there's like an edited or like a remix, and you're like,
or like you're like, that's not the music that it was for the original release.
Yeah,
that's not the music that it's supposed to be. Quantum Leap will forever be mad at you for that one scene. They couldn't get the rights to Georgia on My Mind for the actual DVD release, but it was in the like original TV release for this really important scene. And then the royalty-free music they put instead is just so jarring and makes the scene terrible. And I'm always mad. I will be mad at it forever. It's a very specific rage.
Or when they change the intro music to a show.
Yes.
Like House. It used to be Teardrop by Massive
Teardrop was so good!
So good! And then it changed, and I've never gotten over it. I've never gotten over it.
It would be like if they tried to change Scrubs from the I'm Not Superman. Like, it's iconic.
It is.
And like, God, I only knew what Teardrop was because of House. And now that band is on one of my like Pandora stations now. Like, actively. It's like
that. Mezzanine, like that whole album is perfection. It's solid.
It's in my when I'm in an acid jazz sort of mood kind of station. Including like Breathe and Waiting Line by 07 and like it's real good stuff. Like it's good stuff. But like it's such a good song, such a good vibe. Thank you for that.
It is. Do you have, before we move on from this, I'd love to know if you have a favorite, like, Friends moment that is always the first one that pops into your head.
Oh, God. Oh, fuck.
This is all acknowledging how problematic this show is.
No, always. Because my little brother and I will text each other anytime we get to this scene. And this moment in the series, right? We will always text each other to let each other know this is where we are. Or like send a gif of the moment. Because it is not Rachel. It is Monica and Chandler have gotten together secretly and nobody knows yet. And it's the one where Joey finds out and he puts it together. And he's like, because they're like, they've both been complaining about these trips they went on when really they went together. And he's hurt, like, it's Joey because he's the stupid one, right? Mm-hmm. And he's sitting there and he puts the pieces together and his eyes go, and they like run, it's when they take him and
it's like a tackle and drag.
And they're like, how long is it? So it happened in London. In London? And like, it's that moment. It's the in London. Like,
yeah, no.
My little brother and I will text each other in London. Just no context necessary. And we'll both know, like, that's where we are. Like, it's that moment specifically.
I love that.
It's such a weird pull. But like, that's for me the moment I wait to get to every time.
I think mine is Phoebe and the bagpipes.
Oh, when she's singing along.
It's fucking, and then watching everybody trying to keep their faces straight.
Yes.
Like kills me every fucking time. Yeah. And then watching the bloopers for that is just so good. It's so good. And I just it's one of my first like go-to thoughts is just of that.
I love that. I love that so much. The bloopers are choice. There's the ones that didn't make it into the final cut where you could tell they're just improvising lines. And the best one is it's Monica's in this negligee thing, and she goes, Joey thinks I'm a whore. And Chandler's original line was, have you looked in the mirror? And the audience, ooh, and he goes, they did not like that. Like, so they rewrote it. Like, it was just him testing options. And they listened to the studio audience who were not happy with that choice.
No, like, well, and I love that the show that is consistently problematic, that like the audience called them on it and they listened, like that could have
there were because there were a lot of things that for the day and age were very raw and they pushed it's very problematic now, but like apparently the creator has come out and apologized for misgendering Chandler's dad the entire time and for casting a woman as Chandler's dad has tried. She has since apologized. She was like, I was still learning. I didn't understand. And I didn't know. Marta Kaufman. She was like, I didn't really know or understand. And it was just a joke, but it shouldn't have been. And I was like, okay, growth, good for her. Like, all right,
awesome. I see you. I hadn't heard that. Thank you for telling me that.
It popped up on my timeline a couple of days ago, actually, where it was just she was like, I didn't understand any of this, and I'm sorry. I was like, good for her. Okay, yes, amazing, phenomenal. So maybe knowing where I came from and being like the conversation about how I was raised is so. Everything I am now is so deeply wrapped up in that. Yeah. That it's talking about one without first addressing the other feels unbalanced to me because because even now I'm constantly having to justify to myself that I'm allowed to make these choices, that I'm allowed to be non-traditional, that I'm allowed to exist happily in an alternative lifestyle, and it's still very hard, honestly. There's still a lot of guilt wrapped up in it, especially because of a lot of stuff that happened in my first marriage. Being polyamorous still feels like a trap, honestly, because my ex-husband used the potential of other relationships to manipulate me. Meaning
like his potential to seek out other relationships? How do you mean?
So when he and I were starting to have, so I got married, I'm assuming we're not using real names. I have false names in mind for any man involved in my life story. So we're going to call my first husband John. So I got married when I was 19. And John and I were married for 2 years when things started to really fall apart. As a matter of fact, it was just short of our 2-year wedding anniversary, or just past our 2-year wedding anniversary when we separated. And everything just sort of fell apart. But one of the ways he was trying to save us, I remember we were on this family vacation with his family down at the beach, and we're like walking on the beach, and he had mentioned how he had like these ideas of like me going out and like making out with other men and then coming and telling him about it, because he wanted me to feel sexy and desirable and I didn't, and he thought other men would make me feel that way, but then I would come home and be interested in him. And then when I actually did make out with somebody at a club down when I went home to see my best friend and my parents for a weekend and actually did that, he then got mad at me. He was like, I didn't expect you to actually do it. I was like, you told me to do it. You told me this was what you wanted. Like, so
that's a weird trap.
Yeah. So my husband and I actually refer to it by the real name trap, but the John trap. Like, I will have to double check with him. Cody was the one who brought up polyamory. My husband won't mind me using his real name. Was the one who brought up polyamory. He was actually very scared that I would not accept him for wanting to be polyamorous. And I was like, no, like, and I dealt with my own issues with it because I have a lot of like feeling good enough sort of bullshit. But I came around to it, and I also was like, I feel like it's a trap. I feel like you're going to use it against me if I get into a relationship and you don't. I feel like you are going to use it to punish me later because this is what has happened to me in the past. Shortly after my first husband and I separated, I essentially had an affair because I was still married. But he moved out. We were separated. We were getting divorced. And after I told him about it, he was like, oh, well, now we're really getting divorced. I didn't mean it before, but since you slept with someone else, I was like,
okay.
What? Yeah, it was, well, because he was able to shift blame to me then. Everyone had been asking, why are you two getting separated? And he was not comfortable talking about it. He was not comfortable telling that we had all these other issues. And I was an easy scapegoat. It was easy scapegoat to say, well, she cheated on me. So that's why I was like, technically, yes, paperwork-wise, yes. You had already moved out. You had left. You were sleeping at your parents'. You told me you wanted a divorce. I told you I wanted to separate for a while because I was dealing with some fallout from finding out the truth about him that he had cheated on me before while we were engaged and all these things. And I was trying to adjust my expectations. I had at that point not known that I was autistic. If I'd known that then, be like, hey, it takes me a while to adjust. You're throwing a lot of new information at me. I need to take a step back to process. Instead, at the time, it was panic over, well, if I'd known this then, would I have married him in the first place? If I'd known this then, we have all these things going on. What am I doing? I'm panicking. I've only been with one man in my life. I got married so young. Was there more out there for me? Did I trap myself in a relationship with someone who doesn't actually want me? Like, it was a lot of that. And I spiraled out and I panicked. And he was like, well, if you have any doubts about me at all, then we're just going to get divorced. And I was like, I didn't ask you for that. I said a separation. He's like, no, we're all or nothing. And I was like, okay. And then when I was scared and alone and terrified of being alone, because when you're raised in a church that tells you your purpose is to be a wife and a mother, the idea of being neither of them scared the crap out of me. And so I fell into this very quick, brightly burning relationship with a man who had been interested in me back home. And then because I was scared, I was terrified. I didn't want to be alone, and I was broken, and I didn't understand. And I had learned at this point now with this new man that women could enjoy sex. That was new for me. And then he used it against me. He used it as a way to punish me. He used it as a way to make me a villain to everyone. That was actually the biggest reason I was afraid of talking about any of this for a really long time. Was when we got separated, we basically promised to keep each other's secrets. And then about a year ago, I realized I'll get to that in a minute. About a year ago, I realized some stuff about our relationship, and I was coming to terms with some trauma that I had not been aware of. And I posted about it in a small private Facebook group with like 80 people in. Small. With the rule of nothing leaves this group. I never used names. I never used dates or timestamps. I didn't even accuse him. It was not a accusatory conversation. It was a, hey, I'm healing. Here's my journey. I'm sure some of you women can relate. Here we go. And it got back to him anyway. And he was like, great, so I found out that she's spreading lies about me. Let me tell you everything that happened. Including, so she cheated on me, so she did this and this and this and this. And all my biggest fears of repercussions from him, my family finding out that I had fucked up, all of these things, people thinking less of me because I had made a mistake, was coming true. And it was traumatic for me, and it was a violation of trust and a breach of everything. And it then kept hitting over and over and over again afterwards. He said in this post, well, I always loved her and I always kept her secrets, but I'm done with that now. And I had people immediately coming to me being like, oh, he didn't. You know that, right? Like the minute you left, he was telling everyone who would listen that you cheated on him so he could get sympathy. He never kept any secrets. Like he told everyone. And I was like, I did not know. I spent so long being afraid of this getting back to the wrong people, or people thinking less of me, or people shaming or shunning me.
Yeah.
Because for things he was already saying and doing that I didn't know. And I was like, I spent so long being afraid of calling him out, being afraid of dealing with any of this in a healthy way at all. And he did it anyway. I was like, it didn't matter. It didn't matter when it came time to protect his own image and to try to make himself look like the good guy and the hero. He immediately threw me under the bus. And I was like, I was quiet for 9 years. I didn't even accuse him in this post. It was about me. He made my healing journey and my trauma about him. He made me saying, hey fam, did you know that this and this and this is technically rape? About him. He made me saying, hey women who've been raised in the church, let's talk about boundaries and consent and good girl syndrome, and maybe open up a dialogue to talk about healing. And he made it about him. And he made it about, well, I'm going to vilify her, and I'm going to look like a hero. And he said it over and over again. He was like, I always loved her. I still always cared about her. I was like, oh, you manipulative fuck. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then my family, so I talked to my family about it, and I was like, I'm going to tell you this before it gets back to you because my biggest fear is coming true right now. And my family was very understanding, but also said, okay, now you just need to go quiet. You need to stop talking about it because it is reflecting badly on your family. And I was like, okay, bet I'll, but I've realized in the years since, as I've been trying to deal with that, how bad of an idea that is. As more and more people come forward and tell me, oh, did you know he did this? Oh, did you know this happened? Oh, did you know I went through something similar? I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm done. I'm done not talking about it, honestly. Because, and there's also the idea of feeling like my trauma isn't worth talking about. There's the idea of, oh, it wasn't really that bad. You gaslight yourself into thinking that everything's fine.
Yeah. Compare everything to the worst case scenario, which is absolutely horrific.
Yes.
But it's valid.
It is.
It matters.
And it's the realization that it is indicative of something so much bigger is why I finally started talking about it again. Where I was like, there's all these stories coming out, especially with how many rights women are losing right now, with how much our own autonomy is being stripped away, that churches are doubling down on purity culture, and it's just going to get people hurt.
Yeah.
It got me hurt. And it's been damaging in a way that I am still realizing. Years later, I'll be like, oh my God, this thing happened when I was 16 and I never gave a second thought to it. And now I'm realizing, oh, that was fucked up. Interesting. Oh, that's not healthy or good. And it's just a lot of that. Hence the, I'll think I'm okay. And then bam, suddenly, oh shit, trauma. Like, I forgot. Like, was that as that was fucked up. I thought it's totally normal back then. That's not okay, you know?
Yeah.
So it's a lot of that.
It's a lot to dismantle and deconstruct.
It is. It is a lot when you realize in your 30s, oh, my entire first marriage was rape and assault? Cool. What? Like, when you suddenly realize as an adult that your formative sexual years were assault and you didn't know it. That is a different kind of trauma than if it had been violent or aggressive or whatever. No, realizing after the fact, almost 10 years after the fact, oh my God, was I a victim? Did I not know it? And then you feel like you're not allowed to feel guilty. You're like, oh, it happened so long ago. I should just shove it in a closet and never deal with it. Which is also not great. But it took my now husband, my second husband, bless the man. We were engaged and I was talking about some of my sexual trauma and like why I have issues in that area. I have issues I have a lot of intimacy issues in general. I had talked him through all these things that had happened. And he just was listening to me talk about my 2 years of marriage and all these things, and I can get into all of that. But he's listening to me talk about all of these things that had happened, and he just looks at me really, really sadly and says, "Babe, that was rape." And I was like, "No, it wasn't." He's like, "No, it was." I was like, "You're wrong. You're incorrect. That's false. Oh my God, you're right." And it just broke me. And that's what I was trying to talk about with people. I was trying to say, hey, this is embarrassing. This is uncomfortable. But I know I'm not the only one going through it. And for him to then take that and be like, she's lying about me. He didn't say what the lies were, by the way. He was not brave enough to be like, she said I raped her. No. He just said, she's spreading lies. Let me tell you about her. I was like, okay, buddy.
Smear campaign. Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the things I want to talk about, honestly, is I think people see a woman, especially looking like me, with the short hair and the tattoos and the like clearly rebelling against my religious upbringing. And men trying to defend against women like me will do one of two things. A, they'll assume I'm a lesbian and they will be like, you men won't want you anyway. I'm like, okay. I'm flattered when women want me. Have you seen women? They're amazing. Also, both of my male partners would like to laugh in your face. Two, they assume that I'm here to talk about how much women have been hurt. I would counter with that purity of culture hurts both sides. In a way that I don't think the men are as aware of. In fact, I know they're not. I know they're not aware of how poisonous this ideal is to them. Mm-hmm. Which is one of the reasons I wasn't like trying to accuse him, because I don't think he was aware. I don't think he was aware of what he was doing or why it was wrong.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean it didn't happen. And so now, being presented with that information, his response is, I didn't do anything wrong, instead of, I should learn and be better.
Yeah.
You know? And that's tragic in a different way, I think. And
it is. I love that you brought that up, because any system or like belief system that not only perpetuates the systematic rape of women, but also conditions and programs men to become rapists without even realizing it is evil.
Yes.
If you want to use that word.
I do.
I'm not big onto like the good and evil thing, but like, you know, if somebody uses it, then I, you know, and or like by certain definitions, like, I'm sorry, like, there aren't that many words to like fully kind of get at the insidious cruelty.
At its best, it is willful ignorance.
Yeah.
It is willful ignorance of the system and situation, because constantly the blame is put on the women. Women will come forward at these church schools and say, I was assaulted, I was raped. And the answer is, well, what were you doing in a man's dorm? Yeah. It was your fault that you were there. That's against the honor code. What were you doing in this place? For me, I was hauled before taken before the honor council at my own school and my bishop after my affair. And they were like, well, where are you wearing your garments, which are famous Mormon underwear that's like covers all these things. And I was like, no, but it's because my husband told me not to. And they're like, well, you should have been. I was like, yeah, but I am also supposed to listen to him. My husband had told me to stop wearing them, so I wasn't.
Can I ask why he asked you to stop wearing them?
Because he and I were not having sex.
Okay.
And he was trying to remove more and more barriers so that I would be comfortable having sex. And it was everything from like, I want you to dress sexier. I was like, well, I can't. Like, we aren't supposed to show skin. He's like, well, maybe you just stop wearing those. And then it's like one less layer of clothing I have to get through. You'll feel sexy. But it was always for me. You'll feel sexier. You go and make out with and flirt with men, you'll feel sexier. But then I will reap the benefits because you'll want to have sex. And our sex life had been so fucked up before that anyway, that it was just, at that point, it was me feeling like I had to in order to make him happy and save our marriage. And it's so, it's a thing where I can't quite explain how damaging it is to do these things that you feel like you're supposed to do and be punished for them anyway. Like, I can't explain how trapped I still feel at 32, 10 years after the divorce. Anytime I feel like I have misunderstood or misconstrued something, I'm like, is this really what he meant? Is this really what he wanted? Is this really, fuck? Like, it's toxic, and there are long-term emotional repercussions for this entire situation. I'm realizing I should probably give context. I'm like talking about the fallout, and I was like, I should.
No, I was actually gonna go back, and I was gonna ask, did you grow up Mormon, or did your family convert? Were you always Mormon?
I was always Mormon. And I was always Mormon, and I didn't have a problem most of the time. And I would also like to say this for the record, because a lot of people have like childhood trauma that happens in the home. I don't actually fault my parents for any of this, because my parents were actually fairly like liberal as far as religious people went. Like they were very open about things. They were very like, my mom was brutally honest about sex when asked. And that was the issue, is in societal standards. I grew up in the South and in the church. And the assumption of, well, you'll learn everything you need to out there in sex ed and in class. And they are instead assuming your parents will teach you everything that you need to know. Meant I grew up with some learning gaps in that area. It meant, it is my deep core belief that the ideal of purity culture, as far as church goes specifically, and the idea of it's private, don't talk about it, don't do it, don't, creates too many unknown unknowns. So I didn't know things to ask my parents. If I had known to ask, hey, is this appropriate? If it had been acceptable at any point, my parents would have answered in a heartbeat. They were great. They were wonderful. But the standards of what is or is not appropriate were so set by the church. And my mom especially was so invested in what was or was not appropriate that it broke down the possibility for those communications. It broke down, there was no possibility of those conversations happening organically. And it was never anything that I knew I was supposed to ask. To the point where at one point one of the things that stood in the way of my having a healthy sex life with my first husband was I had some pain and had some conditions that we didn't know about in my lady parts. And my mom was like, why didn't you ever tell me? I was like, I did. I told you that I had pain during my periods. I told you that I had pain during sex. But everyone did, so I didn't know my pain was unusual until the gynecologist told me it was a year after I'd gotten married. and had been trying to have a healthy sex life for a year, and my mom was devastated.
Mm.
Devastated to realize that she had missed something. So I never fault them for that. I never fault my parents for that. But unfortunately, and I never even fault them for, like, my dad was a convert when he was younger, so he had a little more like life experience outside of the church. But my mom was born and raised, like, my grandpa's like a church history professor. Like, they go all the way back. Like, they are multi-generational. But they were still very understanding about a lot of things. The weird situation I was always in was most of my childhood or young adult trauma happened outside the home, and my parents were my safe haven. And when it came to getting married, the idea was constantly, well, now you're each other's problem. You shouldn't go to your parents about these things. My husband would get mad at me for, I didn't want to complain to my parents because they were so invested in me having a healthy, happy life that I felt like I was letting them down if I had problems in my marriage. I felt like I was failing them if I was in a bad situation at home. After the fact, after the divorce, after all these things, my parents were devastated that I had not felt comfortable coming to them. And it wasn't their fault. It was just the life I went to a church school. I was surrounded by church-going people. It was reinforcing this ideal of don't talk about it. Like,
yeah.
And I didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
And it was
set up for.
Yeah. There was actually a moment at one point where my mom, and like I was like, also, like, my parents weren't perfect. They did everything could. I had like fear of getting punished, like a genuine panic and fear over getting punished, because, like, not that I was ever like abused as a child. I think I was spanked twice in my life ever, and both times they gave me a choice. They were like, we can take your book away, or you can have, like, those were your disciplinary. They gave me options, like, and both times I was like, well, I need to keep reading the book, so you can spank me, it's fine. Like, twice in my whole life. Like, they were not big. They didn't have to discipline, but like I had like this weird, deeply ingrained fear of like even verbal punishment. I've realized since then it's the autism thing, because we translate emotional trauma as physical pain. So I would be physically in pain getting yelled at. Didn't realize that at the time. I realize it now. Like, so I had this fear of punishment, and so I was also scared to tell them, because again, I was afraid I was going to disappoint them. I was afraid that people were going to be mad at me. And big fear, gut-wrenching fear. And so I felt horrible for years after that. I hadn't been able to talk to my parents about any of this until after the fact. But yeah, I was, it's important to me to mention, yes, raised Mormon. Yes, I have a lot of issues with the church. I have a lot of issues with the purity culture surrounding it. No issues with my parents specifically, though. And that's always important for me to say. For me. Like, it's very important for me to say. So...
How did growing up Mormon affect your worldview, and also your view of who you were or who you were meant to be, what your value was in the world as a person, as a woman, especially? I talked about that a little bit earlier, and I wanted to go back to that.
Growing up Mormon made me feel broken. Which is a sentence I've never said out loud before. I remember sitting at a certain age, they separate the genders. At a certain age, you go to young women's or young men's. And that continues as you get older. Relief society is for women, priesthood is for men.
Is it I'm so sorry. I grew up without religion, and I know that Mormonism is like fine. A separate thing as well. So is it like Islamic culture where it's separation for prayer, or for like everything, like in Saudi Arabia, or they're separate?
No,
like,
so it is a sect of Christianity. It essentially how it works is this. When I was growing up, at least, they've shifted the format a little bit. When I was growing up, church was 3 hours long. It was first sacrament meeting, which is everybody. Big chapel. It is where you take the sacrament, the bread, and the water, which is a thing Catholics do as well, sort of. Yeah. It's not quite communion, but it's similar. And it's like essentially what you would imagine as sermon time is sacrament meeting. That's an hour long. You do songs, you do prayer, you do talks. Like it's rarely like one pastor sitting and talking. It is no, members of the congregation are picked to give talks. Like that is a thing. Like it's a community thing. And a lot of that I liked, except for I never liked getting up and talking. I didn't like being the one chosen. I hated it, in fact. And when you're very young, they'll start calling on you to, hey, can you give a talk in a month? Here's your topic. I hate this. But it's just what you do. So there's that first hour, sacrament meeting, prayer, song, whatever. And then for the second hour, you split into Sunday school. And when you're younger, it is Sunday school is like the kids go to Sunday school together and learn all this stuff with everybody. And the adults go to Sunday school together, husbands and everybody. Okay. But the third hour is split into different genders. The third hour is the women go talk about women things. The men go talk about men things. And when you hit 11 or 12 years old, that also happens in Sunday school. Okay. But for the primary kids, for like when I was 11 years old, we went to young women. So for that third hour, you're split. The idea being there's different things you have to talk about because you have different gender roles. The men are the ones who hold the priesthood. The women are the ones who are the mothers and wives and whatever. Different responsibilities. And so you talk about different things. Exactly. And in theory, I grew up absolutely feeling like it was a good thing because I was embarrassed and uncomfortable with my own. There were things I couldn't talk to the boys about, like having crushes on them. There were things you couldn't talk about in front of them. That made sense to me. But the older I got, the more aware I started becoming of, this is to teach you what a woman should be. And I never felt like one of them. I never felt demure or calm or patient. And what's more is I didn't want to be. I liked being fierce and fearless and loud and opinionated. These things I liked about myself, I was constantly told were wrong. The things I wanted to be, I loved the idea of having a career. And I was told that motherhood was more important. I wanted to marry someone who already had kids because I knew at a young age I didn't want babies. I didn't want to put my body through that. But I had to force myself to fit into a different box. I loved being able to do theater at church. The moment that my someone in our branch started putting on shows when I was 10 years old, and I started auditioning for them immediately. And that was a church-sanctioned way for me to be bigger. And I was very good at it. I became leads. I learned to be, I'm a professional actor now because of that community theater at church. And I was very good at it. But it was the time I was allowed to be something more. I was allowed to be more when I went to girls' camp. Because we could be loud and we could swim in the lake and we could do, I was the reason why we had archery lessons like the boys. Because I was like, why do they get to do cool stuff like knot tying? And we have to like do crafts. It's boring. So I fought for personally, and became a camp counselor and all of these things to live a life I wanted within sanctioned church ideals. Because at church I had to be quiet. I was undiagnosed at the time. Didn't realize that I paid attention better if I was doing something with my hands. Instead, if I brought something to church to do with my hands, I was looked at like a sinner because I wasn't paying attention. A lot of what I was and who I wanted to be was forced into a tiny, tiny box. And unfortunately, there was a lot of church I loved. There was a lot that I was like, okay, great. I love this part of it. I love this part of it. I love this. But they were all the community things. It wasn't the gospel itself. It was the people who did like me. That was a small group of people. It was the things and the events I felt good about that I liked. Mm-hmm. I liked camping. I liked going on the reenactment pioneer trek. I liked going to events. I liked going to dances. I liked playing capture the flag or church basketball. I liked all of these things. I didn't like sitting in church for 3 hours every Sunday. I didn't like wearing skirts. Pantyhose were the devil. I didn't like having to fast every first Sunday of the month because I was hypoglycemic and it made me sick. I didn't like a lot of the things that other church members judged each other for not doing. There's a time during the first Sunday of the month, which is Fast Sunday, which is you skip the first 2 meals of the day and are supposed to donate the amount you would have spent on those foods to charities and stuff. In theory, a good thing. During Fast Sunday, it was also testimony meeting, which is there's no scheduled speakers. You just get up and speak and and bear your testimony about the church and the gospel if the Spirit moves you. And if you don't get up, it's that look of, do you not believe? Why aren't you standing up? If all of your friends get up, you are kind of expected to get up. And I think I lied my way through those about 90% of the time. I felt more comfortable at camp. I felt more comfortable at girls' camp. I felt more in tune with spirits and the Lord and the universe and the whatever and my own spirituality at girls' camp every summer than I ever did in church. But I was told regularly that was wrong. I was told regularly, you can feel God best at sacrament meeting. And I was like, that is incorrect. You can feel God best at sacrament meeting. I can't. I feel him best in nature. Should have known I was a witch. Like, I absolutely felt better about myself in all the things that they told me I wasn't supposed to feel. And so I felt very wrong most of my upbringing. I felt broken most of my childhood and young adulthood, except when I was doing those extracurricular church things. And that's a hard thing to admit, because I still have a lot of church memorabilia at this house that I cannot bring myself to get rid of, because my parents, because I miss them, because they both passed away, because church was important to them. And it was an important part of my formative years, and so it's very hard to fully separate from. Mm-hmm. It's really hard. And it's really hard to still not feel like I'm doing something wrong. You know?
Thank you for talking about that, especially because it was hard.
It was.
But I think it is very important to say, and all, like, I know that you saying that is going to resonate very strongly with other people who desperately need to hear somebody else say that. Yeah. Who maybe is feeling broken and alone with what they're going through, and feeling like it's wrong.
Oh yeah.
I'm glad that there were things that you could connect with that nurtured you while you were going through that.
Me too. I think I would have been a very different person if I had just left. But I was also never brave enough to. Like, the fact that my older brother got away with, like, not going on a mission and, like, sometimes just not going to church, like, felt unfair because I didn't get away with that. But, like, yeah, it was a weird time. And there's a lot now, like as I'm breaking down a lot of this as an adult, I'm going, oh, that should have been a warning sign. Oh, that's interesting. I think, and specifically with the gender roles thing being reinforced when I never felt like I am a domestic bitch. Don't get me wrong. I love baking. I love cooking. I love cleaning. I do not want to have to do it, though. There's a big difference. And I've watched so many women be forced into those roles. Whereas I grew up in a house where my mom worked and my dad didn't. I grew up in a house with the non-traditional gender roles. And I loved it. But my mom felt guilty her whole life that she had to work. She didn't want to work. She wanted to be a mom. She wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. Whereas the rest of her children, the reason we have good work ethics, the reason we have drive and all these things are half because we watched her do it all. And we were amazed by her. We tried to tell her that her whole life, how much we respected that about her, but it wasn't a life she wanted to live. But it still resonated with all of us in one way or another. With, I want a career. I want a life. I want a something else. And she felt guilty about that for a really long time. So it was also, when I brought up that I wanted a career, I felt guilty telling her. Because she so badly wanted us to have the life she didn't have. You know? And that was always rough to, again, it was hard. It feels broken when you watch someone else want something for you that would have made them happy, and you're like, why don't I want that? Why don't I want this for myself? Why is this not me? Why is this not? So I respect this person. I respect the hell out of my mom. I loved her very much. She was one of my best friends in the world. Why didn't I want the life she wanted? Like, what was wrong with me that I didn't want this? And that's hard to grow up around.
Yeah.
Honestly, of why am I not like normal? You know,
it can feel like you're loving them wrong.
Yes.
And you're not, though.
Yes. That is a thing I was bringing up to someone recently. I talked about it a little bit with you, and then I think I mentioned it to Cody about how hard it is sometimes to find yourself, not because you're rebelling against your upbringing, but in spite of it. Because like I still loved and respected them so much. And when people use the, well, you're breaking your mother's heart, or you're tarnishing your father's memory, I'm like, I'm not. Like, do you understand how hard it is for me to be the most authentic version of myself while still loving and respecting their memories and knowing that they would be a little heartbroken by some of this? It's very difficult. It would be easier for me if I just didn't respect them. It would be easier for me if I was like, fuck my parents, I'm fine. But, oh no, I miss them daily. I miss them daily. It's very hard to try to find the right version of yourself in a society or a family or whatever that you still care about. It's so hard. And that was one of the hard things for me at church was like I loved all the people there, and I loved so many things about it that trying to fight through it and find the best version of me in spite of those things was so difficult. It was so hard. And I guess for some reason I assumed that when I got married it would all fall together, because that was so often the end goal for most women. That was taught as the end game. Marriage, family, kids, done. Like, that was the goal. That was the end. That was the point.
Sunset,
and then I got there,
and credits.
And it was exactly. And then I got there, and everything fell apart, and everything went to hell, and I'm still trying to recover from the trauma from my first marriage when it was supposed to be the end goal. You know, so it's a little fucked up to try to work your head past. Like, this was supposed to be the thing that saved me, and it broke me worse. Like, it's rough. Ooh.
I feel like moved to say something, but I don't want to trespass.
You're okay. Go.
Okay.
Go. Yeah.
And I just want to, when you were talking about parents being your true self, and knowing like how difficult that would have been for certain parts of who you are and what living your truth is like, and I so desperately hope that this isn't trespassing. I don't know what your beliefs are, but my personally, like, I believe that like that a part of death is some kind of revealing of truth, whatever that means, and that that there's a difference between like who people are in life and who they are after that truth has, you know, like, and all the things that that we're stuck in, and all the illusions that are before us when we are so small in our little meat cages, and then after we're allowed to expand and connect, and it's that connection with, you know, whatever is going on. And I truly believe that that whatever connection or whatever truth has been revealed, that it allows them to fully appreciate who you are and what you're doing and the truth that you're living. And I just hope it's okay for me to say, like, I truly believe that they are not proud of you and everything that you are.
I actually believe that too, and it took me a while to come around to that. It took me a long time to come around to the idea that they would still be proud of me despite the fact that I'm not following a life that they had set for me. Because I remember that they knew me better than anybody. And I remember the few times like when I told my dad that I was living with my now husband before we were married, and he was like, "Okay, great. Does he have furniture though?" Because like his big surprise was, "Okay, does he have furniture? Is he okay?" Because like he had to move. Like, is he okay? Do you guys need anything? And I was like, "You're not mad at me?" He goes, I trust you. I was like, what the fuck? Like, and like, that was such a shock to me. Or like my mom, as she got closer and closer to, because they both died of different kinds of cancer. As my mom got sicker and sicker, she like suddenly shifted her focus to like, to my dad, where she was like, I hope you have the money to pursue your art when I'm gone. And it was this thing where like she had always kind of held it against him that she had to work. And like as she got sicker and closer to being gone, like her perspectives shifted and her like ideals shifted to let her understand more what made people around her happy. And I was like, the fuck? Like it was beautiful and heartbreaking that she realized so late some of these things. And even my dad was like, I was shocked by her shift. And like they even stopped asking me, like they would come down and see me down here in Orlando, and my mom never really asked if I was dating anybody. She didn't care. And that was huge. She wasn't asking if I was getting married again. She wasn't asking about boys or family or kids or any of that. And she was just proud of me for being me. She was proud of the shows I was putting on. She was proud of the books I was writing. She was proud of all of this. And like that was huge. So I have to hold on to those things. And the fact that they were both getting to know me more as I moved away from home and moved away from church and moved away from all these things. And the fact that I can still, I'm going to get witchy spiritual for a minute. The fact that I can still feel them regularly feels to me like they haven't abandoned me, and that's huge. Like my dad had his falconer's license when I was a little kid. Like he was big into like birds of prey, and every now and then there's this like neighborhood red-tailed hawk who like that was his favorite, and like it just like stuffs by, and I'm like, that feels like dad. Every time it's there, I'm like, hi, Dad. Like, every time I'm like, oh, I feel like that feels like him. Like, it just showed up out of nowhere right after he died. Like, I came home from his funeral, and there was suddenly this bird in the neighborhood, and I'm like, I've never seen that bird in my life. The fuck is happening? Oh, okay. Or, like, I'll have dreams about them, for which my sister gets mad at me. She gets mad at me because I have dreams where they visit, and she doesn't. And I'm like, that's not my fault. Like, why are you angry at me that I have this? I didn't ask, but like, thank you. So like there's these like, I have a lot of feelings that they're still around in here and like all these things, and that's very helpful. But it's still that like fear, that like big fear in my head of what would they say or do right now if I didn't have the tattoos, I wasn't poly, I wasn't all these things. And now I'm like, there's still that biting fear of like, oh fuck, what if, you know? And I try to push past that because I don't want to be afraid of their memory. You know, that's not the relationship we had in life, and I don't want it to be the relationship we have in death. So, yeah.
I'm so glad that you have that connection and that you had that experience of that shift before they passed. That's so important. I know that so many people who leave the church or shift and change their lives that a lot of the time like family is something that that they end up having to completely like cut ties with, and they never have any sense of like being valued as who they truly are, or any sense of resolution or connection. And it's really difficult. Like it's a part of that trauma and that healing is having to deal with that cutting off family members, and that's so incredible.
Yeah. There's still some difficult with my extended family, and even some of my siblings, that is hard to push through. But it's never been easy for me to just cut people off. And so I just often keep finding myself hoping that things improve with the family members I disagree with, or the ones I'm struggling with right now. Because they are not okay with who I am. Some of them, and it's that's fairly painful, but it's not my biggest focus, honestly, anymore. It used to be. It used to be my biggest fear, and it's really not anymore. And that's a nice place to be. Where I've hit a place with a couple family members specifically where I'm like, oh well, if I don't talk to them again, it's not the end of the world. Okay. next. Like, I've just, that wall has kind of gone up of like, okay, here's the ones who stuck around anyway. And like know all these truths about me and are like closer to me now than ever. And then there's the other ones who are still trying to put me in their box and still trying to force me to believe what they believe. Or worse, trying to force me to be the version of me they thought I was because they never really got to know me. The number of people who go, this isn't how you used to be. Yeah, I was masking, bitch.
Yeah.
This isn't how you, yeah, I was lying my whole childhood. I was lying about who I was because I didn't want to fight with you, or because I didn't want to get in trouble, or because I was scared of being grounded, or because I was scared of this and this, or people not liking me, or people like, I was afraid of living in a house where people knew the real me because I didn't want to get teased. I didn't want to get yelled at. I didn't want to get punished. Any of these things. I was afraid of, even as an adult, admitting some of the things I really believed because I didn't want to fight. Because I didn't want to deal with the fallout of, you keep sending me emails with like articles and shit that like I don't want to read that prove your point. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't have the spoons for that.
Yeah.
I don't have the anything for that. So like I would just lie and like be like, okay, that's nice. So for family members who are like, well, this isn't how you used to be, is like, yeah, bitch, who I used to be was an entire lie. Get to know who I really am. Stop pretending like you know who I was. You don't. You don't. I promise you don't. You think you do? You do not. Like, so that's always fun.
What has helped you kind of get to that place where you were able to find more importance in living your own truth and valuing your own experience and autonomy rather than pleasing them or worrying about them, and being able to like put up those boundaries or those walls internally with like, I'm not going to care about what this person thinks about me anymore?
Every time I've hit one of those milestones of, oh, I don't care, it has been because a worst fear has already happened. A year ago when my ex-husband like went public with all our shit, that was my worst fear for a really long time. And it happened and I got over it. And I was like, oh.
I wanted to ask about that when you were talking about that.
I'm going to need, a lot of this is going to need context and I will talk you through all of it.
Go for it.
Yeah. But it's like that happened and I was like, oh, okay. Or then like being brave enough to get my tattoo because I really wanted it, but being scared of my family finding out, being scared of showing it anywhere. I was like planning on how I was going to wear long sleeves every time I went home. And then my aunt and I had a phone call during which I realized she already knew that I had a tattoo. And I was like, oh, she's not hanging up on me. She's not disowning me. She's not telling me I shouldn't have. I know she doesn't agree with it. But I told her I was planning on getting more, and I told her I was planning eventually on getting a few piercings. But that they were always things I'd wanted to do. And she, like, accepted it and moved on. And I went, if she knows I have a tattoo, she probably also knows I'm polyamorous and drink and swear. And I've been hiding all of those things for a really long time. Huh. Interesting. Okay. And so, like, all these things happen. Or, like, I got into this huge fight with my sister about, and like I've always been afraid of losing family members, and I realized if I'm going to lose her someday, it is because she refuses to accept the version of me that I am. And at the end of the day, trying to be someone else hurt me more. So it's just always, or like my biggest fear with my publishing career and my artistic career was losing my parents, and I've lost both of them anyway. My biggest fear was, what if they never get to see what I become? And they already didn't. So I moved past it. I was like, anything else at this point, my dad got to see my books. Not all of them, but most of them. And my mom got to read the first one finished. It wasn't published yet, but she read the complete cover to cover and loved it. So like they knew what path I was on, and that's all I can ask.
It's beautiful.
I have to, so it was every time it was the universe forced me to face my biggest fears anyway and get past them. And I went, okay. all right, cool. Let's go. Great. And I've had a large support group of found family and partners and friends and viewers and all these people who've made it easier for me to accept bad things are going to happen. People are not going to accept me for who I am. I will still have people. The people who matter will, though. People who matter will still be here. And that's been a process the last year specifically of coming into my own. Because it's been a really formative year. It's been a lot of shit packed into 1 year, because it was in February 2021 was when all the shit hit the fan with my ex-husband. At that point, I was already talking to my long-distance partner, but I hadn't met him in person yet, but he was still there for me. I was also diagnosed with autism last year, and they were all still there for me. I got my first tattoo in this year, and everyone was still there, and people are still talking to me, and all these things, and I was like, okay, all this shit I was always afraid to do is not having as big of consequences as I thought it was going to. Mm-hmm. Because nothing I wanted to do was like super out there. It's not like I was like, it's not like I just decided one day, hey, I'm going to change everything I believe in. No, it was just all extensions of me I already was. And what's great is like people from college or people who knew me all go, this makes sense for you. All of them regularly will come to me and be like, no, I get this for you. This makes sense. This is perfect. I was like, I didn't even think you saw me. I didn't think you noticed. And like people have been messaging me from high school who are like, hey, I know we didn't talk a lot back then, but like, I just want to let you know, like, I'm seeing your journey and like I appreciate it. Like this guy from high school I was barely friends with. We now talk all the time, and he's like, I'm really proud of you. I was like, I didn't know that you noticed. Honestly.
Isn't that weird?
Yes.
Funny when
so
that
weird.
happens. Yeah, I get those people sometimes too. And
yes. It's like, what the fuck? Yeah.
No, it's a great example too for like the ripples that people make in the world. Like we never have any idea the effect that we're having on other people. Like other people do see us, and like if you're being a good person, like, and you're being true to yourself, that matters to the people around you. Even if you don't think it does, they see it somehow. It means something. Like there are people in my life that like were just on the periphery, and just them existing nearby saved my life because it was like a beacon for me. Yep. And I think we all have people like that. And
to know I am someone's people like that is a whole thing. I was like, oh my God, what? Thank you. It's wonderful. And so that was a lot of those walls were broken down for me by force, and I just had to roll with them. That's. But you were gonna ask about the stuff that happened with my ex-husband.
That's not what I meant, but
okay.
But actually, if we can, I actually what I was saying I was going to ask about that was when you were talking about all this stuff happening and this being your worst fear, I couldn't help but like that was kind of relatable to me in some things that I've gone through where it was like, okay, so this is worst case scenario and it's happened. Okay, so that was all the cards.
Yeah.
And now what? Now I'm almost free. Like
yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's weirdly a pain that you go through because like, again, I lost both my parents very close together, and every time that was the worst case scenario, and it happened anyway. Both times. Worst case was they die. Worst case was I'm without them. Both times it happened. And I was like, well, okay, well, I'm primed for this shit now. All right. Like, cool. Next, like, handled my dad's weirdly better because we were ready. We were like, okay, we did this already. We know how this is ending. All right, let's get going. Like, it was just, like, unfortunately, you hit a certain point where you start to recognize the worst case scenario coming for you, where you go, can we just get it over with? Can I get to the next part? Can I get to the aftermath? It's much easier to deal with than the actual trauma of the event. Let's go. The waiting is awful. And unfortunately, like, which sucks. Like, that's a horrible place to be in. But, like, I get to the point where, like, I'm like, okay, I'm going public with this stuff now. Can we get to the fallout? Like, can I just get to whatever he's going to say or do, if anything? Can we just Let's go. Because it's easier because I've been living through the aftermath fallout for a long time now of lots of traumas just stacked up on top of each other. And I'm surviving them. So great, amazing, cool. Next. Like, yeah. It's weird living through multiple worst case scenarios back to back. Where you're like, oh, I can handle that. Okay. I don't like that I can, but I did. I don't want to do it again, but at least I know it's coming now. No. All right.
I'm still here, so this is weird.
Yeah, didn't expect to make it this far. Interesting. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask about your experience of purity culture, because like when you go looking for it, it looks like it has different ways that it kind of is articulated in different cultures, like, or different sects. So like evangelical purity culture, I would imagine that Mormon purity culture is slightly different. And I wanted to ask what exactly that looked like for you, and like how were you being treated? What was being said to you? What were you taught? And then I want to clarify that for people, especially because there might be some people who aren't familiar with purity culture at all, or Mormonism at all. And then I want to lead that into the conversation of how did this set you up for your marriage and the dynamic in your marriage?
Fantastic. I'm ready. Because I actually have a perfect example from my real life that sums up how purity culture is treated, especially in the Mormon Church, with the ideal of it is the woman's job to be the gatekeeper of all purity and not the man's. It is the woman's job to cover up and not the man's job to not be tempted. It is a lot of that. Because like I had tons of examples growing up. For instance, my mom would not let me wear pajamas in public ever because if a man sees you in pajamas, he'll imagine you in bed. The flip side of that, coming from my dad years later, was, honey, if a man's going to imagine you in bed, he'll imagine you in bed no matter what you're wearing. It doesn't matter. But that's not talked about. They were married, and they didn't discuss that dynamic. My mom saw it one way, my dad saw it another, and it was never communicated. But that's not the example I'm talking about. The example I'm talking about happened when I was 16. As I mentioned, I did a lot of church theater. And when I was 16, I was in Romeo and Juliet. I was playing Juliet. And my director believed in, if you're a lead specifically, if it's a different day, your character is wearing a different costume. He believed in, there was no willing suspension of disbelief when it came to costuming. No. If you're a different day, you change. So as Juliet, I am one of the people who has to change frequently. I'm on stage a lot. And I don't remember Romeo having to change that much because it was easier for the man to just put on a different vest and call it a day. I had to change whole dresses and headpieces. And at that point, I had longer hair, so I had to fix my curls in between. So most of the time I had time to run back to my personal dressing room, which was one of the church, like, Sunday school classrooms that had been turned into here's all of her Juliet costumes, and I had people helping me and all these things. But there was one specific quick change where I had 6 lines of dialogue to fully change, top to bottom. Everything but my shoes had to be different. Just whoosh. So I would walk off. The moment I'm out of audience view, I would just start running. And I would start changing as I went. And I remember the 3, it was Mercutio, Ben, Romeo, and the other one, are standing in the hallway. And during rehearsal one day, during this tech week, one of them stopped me and he goes, hey, we're really uncomfortable with the fact that you're like changing where we can see it. Can you wait until you get into your dressing room to do that? Because it makes us uncomfortable that we're seeing skin. Like, I was wearing a tank top like this underneath everything, but it made them uncomfortable. And I stopped and I was like, when do you have to be back on stage? And they were like, not for a couple scenes. I'm like, then why are you standing here when you can go somewhere else? And I was like, if you're uncomfortable, leave. And the looks on their faces so perfectly encompass how purity culture was for me, which was it had never crossed these men's minds that they could remove themselves from the tempting situation. Instead, the burden was on me to not be a temptation, despite the fact that my needs in that moment needed to be prioritized over theirs. That my
first time that anyone had
yes.
ever made a request like that of them.
Yes. And that is something I dealt with my whole life. The idea that, and this is what I'm saying when I talk about how purity culture is also toxic to the men, because they thought they were being good guys by telling me that I was inappropriate. Mm-hmm. They thought that they were being the heroes by being, we can see your skin, right? You know that you should wait. We can see. They genuinely thought they were being the heroes by telling me that they could see my skin, as opposed to leaving the situation. And they looked confused when I told them, hey, my dudes, I actually have to be here. You don't. They were so bothered by that. They're like, what if someone else walks by? What if, well, they also can just know that this is where I have to change. And they can go somewhere else. No one else has to be here right now. And if you did, you can face the fucking wall. If you're uncomfortable. I'm not anymore. I, at that point, had been at a performing arts high school for 2 years. I no longer cared. They did. But it was still my job to cover up. In a nutshell, there's Mormon purity culture. It is not, the men should maybe not imagine us in bed. It's the women shouldn't wear pajamas. Mm-hmm. It's not, the men need to remove themselves from tempting situations. It's the women need to not be tempting anywhere ever. Which is part of the reason why situations like my marriage get so fucked up. Because purity culture is, at its heart, all of these things are inappropriate until you are a wife. And then you completely have to flip a switch. Mm-hmm. Completely. And you suddenly are expected, nay, commanded, to be okay with any and all physical intimacy. Because it is what you're supposed to do. Because you are supposed to go forth and lie with your husband and multiply and be comfortable with this. And that is damaging in a way that I don't even have words for.
Yeah.
It's societal manipulation at its very heart, because it's that idea of women need to cover up their stomachs and wear one-piece swimsuits. Men play basketball shirtless inside the church building all the time. They never say women shouldn't be tempted by these men. If I was to roll my sleeves up, it was inappropriate. If I were to cuff my short sleeves and make them tank tops, it was inappropriate. Mentioning the word bra is inappropriate and tempting to young men. But that's wild to me now, stepping back from it and realizing the way the standards were set so completely one-sidedly. And I know men are taught other things. Men are taught certain things. You have to be the good husband and provider. You have to be this. You have to be that, etc., etc. I know they also have it. That's what I'm saying is I'm aware they also have difficulties in that area. Mm-hmm. Because that purity culture swings both ways. Because you're taught your job is to be pure and chaste and perfect for your husband. And husbands are also therefore taught your wife has been pure and chaste and waiting for you. Therefore, sex is going to be easy. It's just a thing that happens. We're taught so often that if you're tempted and you're alone in the same room with an opposite sex, if a man is alone with a woman, it's just going to happen. Mm-hmm. So you get married, you get into a situation where that's not happening for one reason or another. The men start to assume there's something wrong with them. The women start to assume there's something wrong with them. Neither of them know how to talk about it. Which is what happened in my marriage. Neither of us were equipped to actually have these conversations. Neither of us were equipped to understand the flaws in the intimacy of our relationship, how it was affecting one another, how it was affecting ourselves, or how to move past it at all. And instead, it became well, this is what I was raised to think. Why isn't it right? And it got bad really fast. And it allowed what could have been misconstrued as just trying to have a healthy sex life into, I spent 90% of my marriage never giving consent and doing it anyway. Because I didn't know I didn't know. I did not understand. And neither did he, so. Yeah.
It occurred to me while you were talking, how dehumanizing this is for everyone involved. Both of women who, like, and when we talk about purity culture and all these dynamics, the focus is, understandably so often on, how unfair and fucked up it is to put all that responsibility on don't be tempting, don't cover, you have to cover yourself, and it isn't talked about enough how dehumanizing that is for men as well, because it's teaching them that they're animals.
That they have no self-control.
They have no self-control.
Exactly.
That's so fucked up.
And that's what I'm saying with it damages both. It damages everybody, because they've been taught this whole time. They've been taught this whole time that they have no self-control.
Yeah.
And that it's expected that if you are in a tempting situation, you're going to make a mistake.
Yeah.
They've put a wall around sex and sexuality to the point where it is not only taboo and therefore more appealing to just humans. We know that humans gravitate toward things they're not supposed to do. They have not given you the proper and adequate tools to deal with it, or to acknowledge it, or to talk about it, or to understand it. And that's, it's my first husband found one of the reasons we struggled was he was addicted to porn before we got together, and he had tried to shut that off, but because of that, his only instincts and understanding of sex came from porn, which meant the moment that we were allowed to be together, he expected me to be a porn star. He expected me.
Had you ever seen porn?
Never in my life.
Jeez.
Yeah. He expected me. I wasn't even comfortable being naked in front of him yet. I was undoing a lifetime of cover up, stay safe, stay whatever in a night. I was a virgin until my wedding night. We had sex once. It was fine. And then immediately he expected me to be a porn star. Immediately it was, well, now we can try this. Well, now we can try that. Well, now we can try this. And I wasn't even comfortable having sex yet. I was not used to this. It was new. It was terrifying. And from day one, I was not good enough. I was told from day one that because I wasn't capable or interested in doing these things these porn stars were doing, that I was wrong. That I was failing him. Because the only expectation he had for sex was it's to make kids or it's for the husband's enjoyment. Yeah.
Hun, I'm so sorry you went through this.
Oh, I have barely scratched the surface, honestly, of that whole situation. I have pulled up exactly what I wrote that was the post that got back to him, just to make sure I'm not blocking anything out again. Because I forgot several times. I'm like, oh, great, that happened. Because there's two really, really important things that happened that made this worse. This already bad situation, right? Like I said, I was. If it's okay for me to talk about,
go for it.
I don't know if you have like an order. Okay. So, like I said, he immediately I immediately started associating sex with failure because I was not rising to the expectations that he had for me. I was not rising to the expectations of willing to do it anywhere, anytime, all these things. Which also put in his head the idea that he wasn't sexy enough for me. If I didn't want to do these things, it was clearly because I didn't want him. And that was never anything that really got discussed properly. And me telling him I was attracted to him didn't matter because I wasn't doing the sex things right. And now, in addition, I had an undiagnosed situation that caused excruciating pain every time we had sex. Now, two things happened shortly before all of this. Or during all this, is during. Our first semester back at college together after getting married. Because I had freshman year, and then we got married that summer. A year from the day we met. Because Mormons. You get married fast because you're not supposed to have sex until you get married. It just, you go.
Can I ask,
yes.
Was the marriage arranged, or did you just meet?
Nope,
or
we just met.
You connected? Okay.
No, we met, we connected, genuinely fell in love with this person. That's one of the things that made it so hard. Like, I adored him. We were best friends. We were so close.
Okay.
So we got married, moved in first semester. We took a marriage and family class. Seemed like a very good idea at the time. And a lot of these things they taught were very helpful about communication and about all these things. But two things happened during this class. You had to be a married couple to take it, by the way, or about to be married, because they were going to be talking about intimate things, and you couldn't talk about that with just any student.
Okay.
So we learned about good girl syndrome. Which, if you've never heard of good girl syndrome, fuck it. It is essentially the byproduct of being raised intensely religious. The idea is women are told their whole lives that they are meant to be pure and chaste and that sex is a wicked thing. And then suddenly, the moment they get married, they are expected to switch and completely change the direction of your mindset. Often, good girl syndrome masks itself as discomfort or pain or tightness, but it's really in your head. Bullshit, by the way. We're taught that good girl syndrome exists, and therefore that we can just push past it and it's all imagined. The second thing we learned in that class was we saw a study in which men and women were hooked up to machines and asked to watch porn. And at the end of it, they were asked if they were aroused, and the men said yes and the women said no. But the monitors on her heart rate and brain waves said she was aroused. She just wasn't aware that she was aroused. So we were taught that because science, women actually were more turned on than they thought. They just didn't know that they were more turned on than they thought. So after that, almost every sexual encounter I had with my husband was rape. Because when I tried to complain about the pain, he said, it's just in your head. When I said I wasn't in the mood, he said, you're turned on, you just don't know it.
Holy shit.
When I tried to talk about it, he said, if we do it more, the imaginary issues will go away. A year in, when I was diagnosed with an actual medical condition, as opposed to being apologetic or feeling bad, like my mom did, she felt awful that she hadn't understood what I meant when I said I was in pain. His response was, so you're getting a procedure to fix it so we can have sex now? And you won't be broken anymore? His response was fixing something in me physically meant everything else would go away. Unfortunately, by this time I had so associated pain and embarrassment with sex that even if I did enjoy it at that point, it wouldn't have mattered. It was so deeply ingrained in me after a year of this that I was going to be uncomfortable or in pain. And every time I tried to put things up to try to help myself with that, he saw them as failings and shortcomings, to the point where he brought them up in couples counseling. He would say, she needs to make sure every door is locked and every window is closed before we can even try to have sex. I'm like, yeah, because I'm uncomfortable and I'm worried because we live in a religious neighborhood and your mom just comes over sometimes and I don't want her to just come in. this is intimate and private to me, and you don't care. And he's like, yeah, because it ruins the mood. Anytime I tried to make myself comfortable and it got in his way, I was ruining the mood. Anytime I tried to say no, anytime I tried to say not now, he would, well, when? It's been 8 months. It's been this amount of time. Why? When are you going to say yes? When we finally were getting separated, when we were finally getting separated, he'd moved out, and I had sex with this other man and realized that I actually enjoyed it. And I didn't know that I could enjoy it. I didn't know it was a thing that women could like or want or crave. He looked at me and said, I'm going to prove that you're still attracted to me. And that was the one instance in my head that I thought of as attempted rape. Because he tried and I wouldn't let him go through with it. And in my head, that was attempted rape. That was the line. And I was telling my husband about all of this, my now husband. And that was when he said, babe, all of that was rape. Everything that he did. Everything that he said to you. And my long distance partner said the same thing. He's like, yeah, manipulation of consent is fucking rape.
Yeah.
And that is what I came clean and talked about. That is what I brought up in this little private group about healing. It was people who had left the church or had left this church school we went to and were trying to find healing. And I was bringing it up to them because I thought they'd be able to relate. And somehow it got back to him anyway. And he started telling people that I had just been insatiable and one man couldn't keep me sexually happy and all of these things. And I found out after the fact that he was trying to use me having an affair after we separated as sympathy for himself. He was trying to get other women to make out with him or sleep with him. He was abusing his position as a security guard at school to be in the women's dorms after hours. All these things. And at its core, because I was still trying to live as a good Mormon woman, I got turned into the honor council at school for breaking the honor code. And I was kicked out of school and excommunicated from the church for cheating on him. He had cheated on me before we were married. When we were engaged, the spring break during which I was buying my wedding dress, he was cheating on me with a mutual friend. And he was never kicked out of school because I refused to throw him under the bus. Because I was taught that it was my job to gatekeep morality and purity.
Mm-hmm.
And he was then allowed to stay at school, get this job as a security guard where I know he abused that position. I put other women in danger by not turning him in. He was never kicked out of church. He was basically given disfellowshipped, which is a slap on the wrist, and then he was back in good standing. And to this day, by his own admission, uses LARP events as an excuse to cheat on his wife. Mm. I've had people come forward and tell me, yeah, he was bragging to me about making out with other women at LARPs because what happens at a LARP stays at a LARP. Yeah, he tried to date me the moment you moved out of school. Yeah, he tried to hit on me and get us to like cross some lines as soon as you left. And I was so scared of my own shit and it getting back to the wrong people and hurting my parents or hurting my aunt and uncle or anybody that I let that fear get in the way, and I'm terrified that there's other women out there that I don't know about who he crossed lines with. I am terrified that he did something that I don't know about. Not because I'm afraid for me, but because I know he came very close to crossing lines with me before we were married. And lonely and horny and desperate and angry and given a position of power, I absolutely believe that he would have done it again. And it sucks. And it sucks that I'm still recovering from the trauma of feeling like sexually I was not good. And I still deal with that to this day because my formative years were all him telling me I was doing everything wrong. And then also to be weighed down with this, good God, your silence could have gotten other people hurt. Your silence probably got other people hurt. is terrifying.
Do not put that on yourself. Like I heard it the first time you said it, and I like waited. I wanted to wait, but do not make yourself responsible for the actions of a predator.
I'm trying real hard not to, and that's
It's
that deep
so
upbringing
hard.
thing. Like it's
I've
so
got
hard.
some of that guilt for keeping silent myself, so I completely understand. Sorry, I just like got a spam call.
You're okay.
An abuser or predator's actions, like they're the ones who are making the choices that they are making. Mm-hmm. And you cannot don't carry that guilt. That's theirs. It should be theirs. They've shifted it onto you. They're trying to make you carry that shit. They're trying to make you responsible for it. Like, it's not yours. Put it down.
Trying
Back
really
away.
hard. That was what was interesting, was like I was so afraid of losing all these friends from college or losing all these whatever when he posted all this shit, and instead I had people coming forward privately to me in droves saying, here's all these things he did that made me uncomfortable. I never trusted him. Here's all this shit he's saying about you. I don't believe him. Here's all the... And for me, that was the biggest turning point in being a little more comfortable talking about my truth, is I realized the people who heard things like this from him about me, who were true, genuine people, mm-hmm. who actually knew me or wanted to get to know the real me, weren't going to believe him. And that was very inspiring to me and safe. It made me feel safe talking about some of this, because I realized that so many people came forward and asked. They were like, hey, sorry if this crosses a line. Here's this shit I heard from him. Can I ask how much of this is true? And I was like, happily. In fact, I went public and I was like, hey guys, some of you may have heard some shit that was going on. Yes, I did technically have an affair after he moved out, and we were already planning on getting a divorce. Not before. His family absolutely thinks it's before. It is not. He did some shit too that I'm not going to put him on blast for, because it is not the point. And you and I discussed privately some of that. However, what you need to know is this. He is never going to accept it, but what he did to me was rape. So no, I'm not going to apologize for making a mistake. I absolutely did. Should I have waited until we were legally divorced to sleep with another man? Absolutely, I should have. Would it have changed what happened between him and me? No. As a matter of fact, if I hadn't, and he and I had fixed, quote unquote, our marriage, I would probably still be in a position where I was being abused and didn't know it. I would be in a position where I was still being put in compromising, abusive situations, and I would not have been aware of it. That's the big difference. I regret for my own self, and I regret the timing of the affair, because it gives him an excuse to make me look like a villain. I don't regret that it happened. I don't regret that I discovered that I could like sex. I don't regret the fact that he and I got divorced. I regret the order of operations there, because it gave him the ability to make me a scapegoat for all of his problems. And it lets him get away with a lot that it shouldn't have been the focus. The focus of the public argument should not have been, well, she broke a rule. The focus should have been, you are not responsible enough to... you were not responsible with our sex life. You were irresponsible and reckless with the intimacy I trusted you with. And you need to be better. And anyone who's in that position needs to be aware and be better. Like, again, it wasn't about him. Women who are like me need to know that they can either get out of that situation, that they need to be able to talk about it with their husbands if they're still in those relationships, or they need to be allowed to find a way to heal from unknown abuse. You know?
Yeah. I gotta say, even if you hadn't had that affair. I mean, like, I didn't grow up with the same values, so like my values, I don't view it as an affair or as a violation, because
neither did my parents, neither did anybody else. But for legality, paperwork, and school, the fact that I was at a religious university,
technical affair.
I literally could not graduate college because of that.
Which is
I don't have a degree.
I
don't have a degree, whereas he has a teaching degree. I've had people come to me and be like, I don't trust him as a high school teacher, just by the way. I don't trust him with the female students. And I'm like, yeah, neither do I. But I have no way of dealing with that. I have no way of I don't, if I'm being completely honest, I do not trust him as a high school teacher.
That sounds valid just from the picture that you're painting me, which is not great. But I gotta say, even without that affair, he would have made you the bad guy anyway. He would have found a way. You could have been a fucking saint the whole way through.
Yep.
And if you had exited that marriage, he would have found a way to make you the bad guy. And the system is set up so that everybody in charge was always going to agree with him.
And that was very true, because everybody, I had his aunt showed up on my doorstep to call me a whore as I was in the middle of moving out and moving home and packing to leave. She just had to get that word in. She showed up on my doorstep to tell me to never speak to anyone in her family again. A, I didn't want to. B, it wasn't her business. And I actually told her this when she asked me to spill all our secrets, when I was like, it's not a one-sided issue, but thanks. She's like, well, tell me what I did wrong. And I legitimately looked at her in the face and I was like, no, because he still has to live with you, monsters. Like, he still has to live with your judgment. I don't. And I believe that. It took him years to come clean about his own sins. And I use sins loosely. To them, sins. To me, the other shit is worse. He's never admitted the issues that we had sexually. Never. Because he doesn't acknowledge them as real problems. He instead sees them as, she didn't want to have sex with me. She was wrong. Mm-hmm. She was not good at sex with me. She was wrong. She was not willing to give me sex to keep me happy. She was wrong. But his own mistakes, his own cheating before we got all those things, he finally came clean to his family about, but it took years. And a lot of pressure from them also. Because when she showed up on my doorstep, they did not know the whole story.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter. Because I was the whore who broke their baby boy's heart. Didn't matter what we'd done. Didn't matter what he'd done. Didn't matter any of it. I could have known about the abuse back then. I could have realized I was being abused at the time. And it wouldn't have mattered to them. Because divorce is seen as a taboo and a sin in the church. Because you're only supposed to have sex with one person. Ever. Being remarried is still got a stigma attached to it in the most fundamentalist branches of the Mormon Church. Which is fucked up. If my husband died and I needed to remarry and wanted to have kids with them, and I was seen as an adulteress, especially considering that polygamy was actually very big in the church for a long time, and so there were men who were sleeping with multiple women. But if a woman does it, she's a whore.
Oh yeah, I totally forgot that fact. Wait,
most people forget that that's actually a staple of the Mormon history.
I forgot that.
You're welcome. When there's so much other shit going on that you forget that they were actively polygamists for like 20 years.
Yeah.
Like
Thank
the point where like
reality
you're
check.
welcome. Like for the point where like I grew up with people making jokes about, do you have a bunch of moms? I'm like, no, that's not actually a thing that we do anymore. Like that's not a thing. And it's true, it's not a thing. But it just
still some dudes that try to make it a thing, but
oh yeah. Oh, 100%. 100%.
So the listener question is basically it's curiosity about Mormonism and how cheerful all the Mormons always are that this person knows, and they wanted to know, why is that? What's the story with the Mormon cheerfulness?
I have actually heard that a lot my whole life. I have
Yeah.
heard quite often. Every Mormon I know seems like really happy, and that's true, and it's one of the reasons that gets so confusing to like have struggles or trauma within the church, is because we are not, there's a different mentality from like the Catholic saint mentality of like, and even the stereotypical Jewish mentality of we suffer, we are going to suffer and focus on the suffering. Instead, Mormon mentality is we're going to focus on the life and we're going to focus on the joy. In fact, we are told not to wear crosses or symbols of the crucifixion because they symbolize Christ's death, and we are supposed to celebrate his resurrection and life.
Okay.
The very core of it as a Christian religion is focused on life and living as opposed to sacrifice and dying. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's one of the reasons I have such a complicated relationship with it is all the cannot do's of the church are there's this thing called the word of wisdom that is essentially the no coffee, no tea mentality that the church is famous for. No coffee, no tea, no gambling, no smoking, no drinking.
Yeah.
All of those things are things that cause addictions and take away your agency. And the whole point of the church is free agency. Mm-hmm. And being allowed to make your own choices. Which is why it's ironic when they back things like dismantling Roe v. Wade, because it's the whole opposite. But that's one of the reasons I get mad at purity culture is we understand when we're growing up why we don't drink, why we don't smoke. We're like, okay, great, amazing. It's because it can cause all these problems, all these things. Mm-hmm. Why we don't have sex is just the Lord says. Like, it's just a very, whereas I feel like if they raised these kids having the same, letting them make the choice, letting them make the decision, saying, hey, we like when people do this, but here's why. Let's talk about it honestly. It's not that big a deal. Like, it's this thing that you do. Like, I feel like they'd have a lot fewer issues with that. But I digress. As a whole, that is one of the struggles. Is every Mormon I know is fairly happy with their lives. They have chosen to be there. There's a lot of community building. There's a lot of, you should be happy that you are growing up in the one true church kind of mentality. There's a lot of focus is on the family. Focus is on living your life and the best version of your life you can. However, is when it bleeds out into, what if the best version of my life is alternative? Like, so most of the Mormon families you see who are living within those traditional family roles are incredibly happy. When I was growing up, I had a really, really good home life. And I loved my parents and I loved my siblings because family stability is a huge focus of the church. Having time with your family. Like a night set aside for game night or movies or family dinners every night, every week, even when the parents are both working or busy, is like really, really important. Mm-hmm. I grew up taking family vacations every summer. I had family home evening every week where we would just like watch a movie together or whatever. And I loved that. I loved growing up in that idea. And like, there's a lot to be said for people do notice that Mormon families are often very happy, very healthy, very well adjusted. But then you get into the darker side of that with, for instance, most church leaders say Monday nights should be family home evening. It's the night the church has set aside. We have no events on those nights because Monday night is assumed you're going to stay with your family. Well, my dad worked evenings, so we had family home evening on Sunday nights. And people shamed us for it. Because we had our night, a different night of the week than the rest of the church. And that's the issue. It's like, we're still adhering to the message, which is have a night set aside for your family. We're still doing this. We can't do it in your time frame, though, because we have different needs than you do. And when people in the church have different needs that break the standard, that's when it gets, like, I couldn't fast. I was medically not supposed to fast. And so when I stopped fasting, people would, well, you should just suffer through it. You should just deal. No. Oh, that's dangerous. It's medically dangerous for me to fast. My mom got huge migraines and she would end up in the hospital. And she was not supposed to fast. She was told not to. And people, really, really uptight people, would get judgy about that. Like, that's not... So for a church that says a lot of don't judge, love everybody, there are some very vocal minorities of people who are... They're a smaller population of the church. But they are loud about it. They are really loud about the judgy. And unfortunately, because there are so many people who are, again, that joy of, even when you lose someone, there's what's called the eternal perspective of, this is just a part of the life. There's a life after death. Mm-hmm. So I'm not done yet, and I'll see them again. I'm allowed to be sad now, but instead I'm going to celebrate the life they had. All of that. Mm-hmm. That's just a constant. The idea of, it's predetermined when you come here. The life before life, the pre-existence. Suggesting that you were born and selected for this time period for a reason. Instills in you from a very young age a chosen one mentality of, I was chosen for this time anyway. Mm-hmm. I'm here for a reason because I'm strong, because I'm kind, because I'm whatever. You're very much raised with an idea of, you are the best for this time period.
These are the trials that were selected for me.
Exactly. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that deeply ingrained. And again, not necessarily things that I think are bad. It's why I struggle and I still defend a lot of church ideals. And most of that is the community and those things. Mm-hmm. It is when you hit those walls of, the moment I deviate, I am shunned, that I start to have a problem. I'm like, oh, nope.
Yeah. Well, I loved when you were talking about the focus on autonomy and and maintaining that, and then the way that kind of like breaks down with purity culture, and it just kind of like had this like click moment where it was like, oh my gosh, how beautiful would it be if, instead of this silence and this purity culture thing, if they would actually educate and say, hey, here's all this information that you need in order to be fully autonomous.
Yes.
And choose to not rape people.
Yeah. It would be
to be a good person. Here's the information that you need. Yeah. And the self-control that you need to,
and the tools you need.
Yeah. Yes. And here's how you autonomously choose to be a good person. Yeah.
But I think it gets mixed up. I think it gets mixed up in this. There's a church ideal of avoid evil or the appearance of evil. For instance, it is, even if you're not drinking or smoking, don't go to a place that they drink or smoke. Not because you might be tempted, but because other people might see you and think you're drinking or smoking.
Ooh, that is problematic.
Really? Yes. And it gets confused. I believe the original concept behind something like that is the idea of, if you are being a good person, the sight of you being a good person encourages other people to do the same, right? Mm-hmm. So in theory, great, fantastic.
Yeah.
But what they decide is evil is a weird shift. For instance, when I was younger, I had a lot of male friends. They were my best friends. And even if I had no feelings for them whatsoever, I was not allowed to be alone with them before I was 16, because 16 is dating age. If I was 15 and wanted to go to a movie with my friends, it couldn't be an even number of men and women. I couldn't sit with a boy. I couldn't any of those things, because that's an appearance of dating. And I was like, okay, but if people aren't gossiping like they're not supposed to be, it wouldn't matter, would it? But it does. There's a lot of judgment nested in the freedom of everything culture, that is very unfortunate to watch and to understand from a distance. it's very uncomfortable to understand from a distance that that people report back. Mm-hmm. Like, my mother-in-law used to show up on our front porch because my ex-husband and I weren't at church that Sunday. She would show up at our door. Like, why weren't you at church? And we're like, because we had a really long, rough week and we wanted to spend some time alone together. And it was unacceptable that we had missed church. It's the forced spirituality on their time frame that is so painful sometimes. That drives people away from the church in droves. Whereas so many core concepts seem like such good ideas. They're poorly executed and poorly enforced. And that's really, really shitty, honestly. Because the idea of autonomy, the idea of you should be able to make your own choices, is shut down at every corner at every turn a lot of the time, with shaming people who do make choices you don't agree with.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's the hate the sin, love the sinner mentality of, I'm going to be a good person and stay in your life, while telling you constantly I disagree with your life. Mm-hmm. That's not the same thing. It
encourages judgment too. Like, yes. the whole appearance of evil thing, like that, that demands that you be looking for evil and judging.
Exactly.
That requires that of you. Exactly. And encourages that. And then
again, that's why those young men think they're being the heroes, by pointing out to me that I am being immodest.
Yeah. That policing aspect.
And because, unfortunately, people who take missions, like church proselytizing missions outside of the States, understand very intimately that modesty is relative. It's not a holy concept. It's not. It is a relative concept. I had a friend who went to some tiny, tiny islands that only like 6,000 people in the world speak the language. And all the women are just topless. And they are taught before they go, you are not allowed to tell them to put shirts on. You are not allowed to get in the way of their local culture. Don't do it. So that changes a lot of their lessons, because modesty is different there. It's not the same thing.
Interesting.
So the people who've been on some of those missions understand that. The people who haven't don't. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, so your morality is relative. Your morality is relative, but you're treating it like it's ironclad. Your morality is flexible, but you don't want to admit that your morality is flexible.
Yeah.
It's when it suits you. And it's very confusing. And it's very painful to try to exist in, And because it's true, it's like, by the laws of the Bible, any woman who remarries is an adulterer, right? But in reality, most Mormons I know, again, if my husband had died and I had no kids and I wanted to have kids with most of them wouldn't judge. There's still a little bit of a stigma associated with it, but most of them would understand if that's why I had sex with another man, And yet they have trouble wrapping their own heads around those concepts. Like, from what I've seen across the board, and especially what I was dealing with during my own divorce, because it is considered a last resort to get divorced. And everyone has to sign off on it when you're in the church, by the way. You have to write a letter to the prophet saying, please unseal us. We don't want this anymore. So when our Mormon couples counselor and our stake president, which is essentially, there's like the bishop, and then above them, there's like the stake presidency who watch over several bishops. And and our stake president both looked at our situation and went, yeah, no, there's no saving you two. Like, we had to have church members sign off on us getting divorced.
Wow.
Because it is considered such a sin in certain circles to get divorced despite anything that was going wrong.
I'm glad that was granted to you.
Me too. Oh, me too. Yeah, it was, and it's a whole thing.
I do want to ask about
ask anything.
if you are you can say like, I don't feel like getting into that. But I do just want to like talk about missions for a second.
Yeah, go nuts.
And I'm curious what your feelings on them are, like that practice.
If you'd asked me this a while ago, I would have had a very different answer. Because I'm realizing more and more that, yeah, the idea of white Christians traveling to other countries to spread the word of God is kind of fucked up. Because it's 2022 and the internet exists and people know. If they want to know about religion, they know. You don't have to come to them. However, the aspect of it I do believe in is a couple of things I always agreed with. One, the timing of when men specifically go is when they are in that age where they're at the most risk for being idiots. They go from like 19 to 22. And there was studies done about how, like, because men mature slower, that men who've been on missions grow up a lot during that time frame. Because why? They have to learn to cook for themselves. They have to learn to clean for themselves. They have to learn to do laundry for themselves. They have to learn how to behave like adults very quickly because they have to in that situation. There are room checks. There are schedules to keep. There are all these things. And men who've been on missions often mature during those missions in ways that you don't get other places because boys will be boys and they let boys get away with a lot of shit. But it's like I agreed with that. Like, my little brother grew up so much on his mission. Like, when he came back, like, he'd learned how to deal with his anger issues because he had to. He'd learned how to deal with things that he never had to deal with before. He came home, he was like, hey, do you have this recipe for this thing? I'm like, you cook? He's like, yeah, I was on a mission for 2 years. I was like, again, you cook? You didn't just get McDonald's for 2 years? He's like, no, I learned how to make this because I missed it, and mom couldn't make it for me because I wasn't allowed to come home. Like that's like, so like, I agree with that idea of there's a lot you learn. Like, there was a lot for me I learned doing the Disney college program. In my mind, they're very similar because I came here and it was a go-between. It was a middle ground between in college, just doing stuff, and real world where I have to pay rent. It was like a nice Venn diagram where the two met. That's how I feel about a lot of church missions. The thing I like about them are the service missions. A lot of the time, women go on these more than men. The service missions are less about spreading the word of God and more about where needs us. Where do we need to go build houses? Where do we need to go help on farms? Where do we need to go help families survive natural disasters? Mm-hmm. Where do we need to go do this? And I love that as a concept because it is, in theory, very people who want to get involved and help other people and don't know how to do it. That's a really nice way that the church has a system set up. Famously,
I like that idea.
Me too.
I didn't know that service missions existed. The only ones I've ever heard about is the proselytizing, which I have a huge fucking problem with. And this whole time I was thinking, wow, what if there were some kind of like volunteer program kind of gap year setup where like you have that same experience of leaving and interacting with a different culture or society and being self-sufficient and and all of those good things at that point in your life. But without the proselytizing and colonization.
And that's that's exactly my thought, because I love the idea of, I'm going to learn these cultures. I'm like my dad met my mom on his mission. Oh. They met in Germany.
Oh, wow.
Right? Like, there was no reason in hell both of them should have been, like, the only reason they got married and that I exist is because my dad was on his mission. It's the only reason. Mm-hmm. But he learned so much about the culture. I grew up in a household where every now and then German was just spoken. My siblings learned German so they could talk to my dad in German. My dad spoke fluent German. I grew up in a household that focused on other cultures because my dad got to go to another country for 2 years and had to live among them. I want to travel because my dad talked about these other countries he got to visit. That's I love. Mm-hmm. But the idea of, I'm going to knock on your door and tell you about my religion is very uncomfortable to me. And if it was more about the cultural aspect and more about the learning and more about the experiencing other lives and lifestyles, and I feel like the world would be a more well-rounded place if it was standard practice in humans to take 2 years in between high school and college and go visit another country.
Yeah.
and go be in another place. And
I
go,
agree.
those are the parts I agree with wholeheartedly. Yeah. Like, my uncle went to Brazil, still speaks frequent Portuguese, or fluent Portuguese, and is the reason why when my family goes home, we go to this Brazilian restaurant, and they bring the meat to your table on a sword, and, like, he can speak with the waiters, and that's amazing to me. I'm like, that's so cool. I struggle with foreign languages. I feel like I would need to be immersed to learn. Wouldn't that be cool if that were the reason they did it? Yeah. Was to understand the rest of the world outside of your walls. Yeah. Because church members in other countries do it too. I've met missionaries from France who come to America for those 2 years. And they're fascinated and freaked out by us. They're like, what the hell is happening here?
Rightfully so, I gotta say.
Yes, correct. I've met people from all over the world who were missionaries who came to our ward at church. And I was like, where are you from? The Netherlands? That's really cool. There's that cultural exchange, I feel like, is so much more important. Mm-hmm. And here's the thing. I truly believe that if the church's goal is to proselytize, convert, whatever, you do a better job of that by just being the kind of person people want to be and be around. The listener question about happy, cheerful Mormons. I had people in high school who wanted to learn about my church simply because I existed. I never tried to teach them. They wanted to know more about my church because they saw how happy I was, and in their heads they went, every Mormon I know is really happy. Maybe I should get me some.
Would I be happy if I were Mormon? Yes.
Exactly.
That is the train of thought, yeah.
Yes, and not that I think just going out to try to convert an entire populace is a good idea. I think presenting the best version of yourself and letting people decide if they want to be a part of that life. It's like, for me, when Sway was trying to convince me to be a Twitch streamer, I watched how successful and wonderful he was and how great his community was. And I went, would I be happy doing that for myself? Mm-hmm. Yes, the answer is yes. But he didn't preach to me the virtues of Twitch streaming, our Lord and Savior Twitch. Like, it was a big difference. He encouraged me to do it because I had expressed interest in doing it. Yeah. Big difference, and so I think there's a key step missing in that I understand the mentality of this thing makes me happy. This thing is this thing that I believe is going to keep my soul safe for eternity. I should share it with the people I love so they too can be happy and safe. I understand that. Same reason people talk about CrossFit, yoga, therapy. Like, this is this thing that's made me happy. I'm going to tell everybody else about it. But instead, I am much more likely to believe someone if I just watch them have energy and when I ask, they go, oh yeah, I do CrossFit. Be like, really? Should I come? As opposed to, guys, let me tell you about this CrossFit gym. I'm going to bring 9 of you with me.
I'm going to block the door and tell you everything. No one leaves.
Exactly. Because can you imagine if people still showed up to your doors, like, Avon calling, but, like, for other things, like, hi, hello, I notice you drive a Plymouth. May I interest you in the word of Honda? I would very much like to make you sell your car and buy a Honda instead. Because but I like my car, it works for me. Okay, but here's why our cars are better. Okay, but I don't have the money or time to invest. No, let me tell you why our cars are better. Okay, are you going to buy me a new? No. Okay, what? Like, it would be weird for anything else, but we've come to expect it from religion. Between Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. And it's not normal. And I do genuinely think that just by being good people who are there, being the best version of yourself, they would have a much better time. Yeah. Because that's the thing is, and that's why I struggle. That's why I struggle so much, because I also know the stories about the first responders on the scene at Hurricane Katrina was the Mormon Church. Because we are taught to prepare for any disaster, and we have, like, storehouses full of supplies for anything. You can volunteer to go work at the Bishop's storehouse, which is like, we're packaging dry goods. We're all these things. We're making sure that they are stocked and prepared and labeled, and we know when they expire, and we know when they're, So we're prepared for any emergency. We are taught from a very young age to do food storage and like emergency storage in our homes for emergencies. So we're okay. So we're self-sufficient. And so we can help other people who may need us during those times.
Yeah.
And frequently we are the first responder. I say we because I can't I'm not a member of the church anymore, but I can't pull myself out of that mindset.
Yeah.
The church is regularly the first responders in a lot of these situations. And not from a proselytizing standpoint, from a genuine, we are here to help standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And like, please give me more of that and less of the other shit, please.
Yeah.
And that's what gets confusing and frustrating for me, and why I struggle to, like, I don't consider myself a Mormon anymore. Tattoos, drink, swear, all the things. But it's those things that I struggle to pull away from, where I'm like, you guys are so close to getting it right. You're so close. You're doing so many things right. You're doing so many things right, but then also so many things wrong.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating. It's painful to watch and live through, because my instinct is still to defend a lot of parts of the church. And I have to remember, I'm not defending the parts that are supporting the overturn of Roe v. Wade. I'm not defending the parts that made it possible for me to be assaulted by my own husband. I'm not defending the purity culture or the mentality of women are in charge of stopping everyone from sinning. I'm defending the community and what it could be, and the parts of it that I saw growing up, and the good parts that I saw that I want more of in life. And it's hard. It's also one of the reasons why I never spoke up, is because I was always so worried that I would hurt my friends and family who were still in the church by choice. And I was like, you know what? That's not what I'm doing, though. And that's not... I got lucky and I grew up around some fairly open-minded members. It doesn't mean all of them are, though. And as a majority, a lot of them are not. And there's a huge difference there. Huge difference. It's hard to separate sometimes, though.
I like that you're honest about the... I appreciate, like, an answer that acknowledges complexity.
Oh, all of mine. All of them.
Yeah, and so I appreciate your honesty with that. So I had originally, when we had started talking, I had thought that you had exited the church by choice. I hadn't realized that you had been excommunicated. How was it being forced to leave the church? I would imagine that was that it would be really really upsetting, and that it kind of would have been like being lost at sea, all of a sudden being cut off from all of these support structures and community and just everything. Like, so this foundation that you had your whole life, and having that removed. Can you talk about that and how you got through that?
Honestly, you would think all of that. You would think all of those things. But I was relieved. It was explained to me, essentially, that when you're excommunicated, you are no longer held to the standard of the church. That God will forgive your transgressions a little easier because you are not being held to the same contract, essentially. You are released from your end of the contract.
Okay.
And I, as someone who had been on the brink of figuring out who I was and was struggling with all of that in that moment, felt more at peace than I had in years, knowing that I could make my own choices in a way I hadn't ever been able to before. It was I was more worried about the embarrassment of my family desperately wanted to see me rejoin the church and be rebaptized into the church as an adult. My father, I know, regretted the fact.
Do that?
Yeah.
Oh.
You can be baptized, you can join at any age. And
so
if
after being excommunicated, you can...
If you go through the repentance process and prove you are worthy of living the church life again, you can go back.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
You can go back. Yeah. I could have gone back at any time if I'd wanted to. The biggest struggle for me was trying to explain to my family without explaining to them that I didn't want to. And that is not ever a conversation I actually had. It's just something they eventually kind of figured out. Because for a while, I would seek peace and comfort at church. But alone. I moved here, I moved away from everybody. I moved to Orlando right on the heels of my divorce. I got separated from my husband and moved away from school in like October, November of 2011. And got accepted in the Disney College program and moved out here in January of 2012. So I only had a couple months at home figuring out myself and my life. And then, moved here, found the local church building. Every now and then I would go sit in the foyer, the lobby area, where they have speakers so you can hear what's happening in the actual chapel. And I would listen to just sacrament meeting. It was just, they actually had a special church ward for Mormons who were working at Disney because they know we can't pick our own hours. So, whereas mostly it's Sunday during the day, they have the 3-hour whatever, they also had a Sunday evening session at 8 p.m. That was just a 45-minute sacrament meeting and nothing else. Just that. 45 minutes, you're done. I was like, I can do that. So I would every now and then go listen. Sometimes I didn't have the energy to dress up cute in my Sunday best. I would just wear jeans and a t-shirt and I would sit by myself. I never got to know anybody. But I was okay with that. Because I felt out of place still. But I knew every time I was going for me. I was not going because anyone was watching me. I was not going because my parents were asking me to. I went for me. And that was very comforting to know. I was like, okay, this may still be part of my life, but I'm not sure yet. But I can pick. And then I went less and less, and every now and then I would feel the need to I'm stressed, I'm having a panic attack, I need to go somewhere I feel comfortable. And I would go and I would sit and I would listen. And then I would leave. Or I would drive by we have a temple here, which is a whole other thing. And I would just go sit outside it and just be in the space where I sometimes had comfort and where I felt like I was home. But I never really felt the need to go reinvest in the community or anything because I was finding other pieces of me that I'd lost. Mm-hmm. I was getting re-involved with theater. I was loving my job at Disney as a character attendant. I was auditioning for shows. I was dating new people. I was meeting new friends. I was all these things. And slowly but surely, the parts of me I actually wanted back came back. I found other ways of addressing my spirituality in witchcraft. I found other ways of praying and connecting with a higher power on my own and building a community of like-minded people on my own without that. And eventually my family stopped really asking if I was going and sort of started accepting that I wasn't. And every now and then I get into a little bit of a thing with some of my extended family members about church stuff. Most of them just haven't said anything. And I was like, okay, if I ever choose to go back, it's on me. I won't, because there's a lot going on there now that I'm like, no, thank you. But it was comforting to know that I was no longer expected to meet the standard that had been set forth for me. And I'd never had that before. Mm. I had never had the freedom to make my own choices without the fear of divine retribution before. And I was ashamed of being so relieved. until I wasn't. I then was more ashamed that my dad never got to rebaptize me because I know he wanted to. But he stopped bringing it up. Mm-hmm. I was more ashamed that when my little brother gets married, I will not be allowed at the wedding. That's painful. But my older brother wasn't at my first wedding because he was not a worthy member of the church at the time. And I got over it. So my little brother will get over it. And it was things like that that just slowly fell away. And the realization of, without the societal expectation from the church culture of society, I found the pieces that I liked and was able to keep and let the ones that were hurting me go. So while there are a lot of things I miss, I miss being a camp counselor at girls' camp. I miss some of the weird inside jokes that you only get when you grow up in the same religion as someone else. Some of the moments of, this feels like sisterhood and whatever, and like all of these things. I found ways to find similar versions in other places. And the belief that I can find better versions of those things for myself. I'm basically looking for a coven. I was like, listen, a lot of the same spirituality things I was looking for, I've been able to connect with a lot of people about my own spirituality and craft and like all these things, with my friends. My husband now is like, he knew that rune work and like strength and like my tarot were like becoming really important to me. And so like I was doing this fitness test for work, and he like designed this strength rune that he put on my shoulder for me, that like, and he explained what all of it was and like all of these things. I was like, that's so sweet. Like that's like, he took and accepted that. Mm-hmm. It was like, right, that's part of your journey right now. I'm going to participate. And like every tarot deck I own was bought for me by somebody else who respects and accepts and wants to be a part of my journey. Like that's huge for me. I was like, okay, I have this community. Great, amazing.
Beautiful, yeah.
It's wonderful. And so yeah, it's, the lack of structure is still hard to this day. Sometimes there are parts of the church structure that I miss. There are parts of the community that I miss, even years, a decade later. But I found ways to replace or upgrade them myself. And yeah. And it's not a thing I feel the need to go back to. For a long time, I assumed I would. But I really don't think so. And that's actually okay with me, and it didn't used to be. I was relieved but assumed, okay, this is my gap years, and then I'll come back, and then I just didn't, and I was like, you know what, I'm actually good. Like, I'm good.
This is where I live now. I like
it.
I
like it here, I'm fine. Like, I never really liked it before, I just pretended I did because everyone around me did, and I didn't want to feel broken. Like, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious. Is there a fear or a hatred of witchcraft that exists within the Mormon Church the same way that it exists in other Christian sects?
No.
Really?
It's not a thing it's not really a thing that I realized was a real thing because we just don't talk about it. It's not really a thing they talk about at church.
Okay.
Like it's really not addressed. It's really not addressed or like treated like a sin or like treated like a whatever. And like, it's weird because like my sister is now married to like he's like a Norse pagan who was like raised in the church. And there's like a weird ideal from the idea that like, at least with the people I grew up with, I have shifted this into, if God created a lot of different people, why would he not create different ways to communicate with them? So like the ideal of like, you are allowed to feel more comfortable in certain places or certain things or doing art or doing whatever is kind of in there. It's in the mix. And so like for me, my craft being my art for a long time, like I grew up doing arts because of the church. because it was this great outlet where they went, she's going to be good at this. And I went, yes, I am. There's a lot of artists and there's a lot of singers and actors and all these things. As a matter of fact, a lot of big name actors and singers were raised in the church. Christina Aguilera, Ryan Gosling, Emma Stone, like all raised Mormon. Katherine Heigl, like you just kind of gravitate toward the arts. The idea that that God put all these things on earth for us to learn and enjoy from is very close to a lot of, I'm finding spirituality in the flowers and in the earth and in the whatever rituals. Like, there's a lot of ritual in Mormon Church. That's a lot of what's happening is it doesn't feel like it. But I'm stepping back and realizing, oh, these patterns, these whatever, that's a very ritualistic idea. That these things have to be in place in a certain way to make this happen. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's an easier leap than people realize. I was never taught to hate it. I was never taught to shun it. I was never taught that it was a sin. I was never taught that it was real. It's like a practice. In fact, when I first read, when I tried to go back to school, boy, if I had the money and time, I would go finish my degree right now. But I switched degrees. I switched to an anthropology degree. So I was fascinated, and I was taking this magic and religion course. I still have the book somewhere. I was reading this paragraph about witchcraft and about that, like, conceptually and historically, witches were just more in tune with the seasons and more in tune with the, like, all these things. And I was like, oh, me. That's me. And I texted my sister and I was like, it's me. And she goes, yes, it is. Wow. I was like, huh, interesting. I was never told, don't go down that path. Like, I might have been, and I brought it up to, like, a bishop. If I had been an active member of the church and I was like, I think I'm a witch, he might have been like, you're not. But it was never really addressed, you know? It was never, like, taught as a thing that was real.
So interesting. There's so many sects where a lot of the conversation is, you know, like, if it's talked about, like, it's like, there's still, like, in some of them reference to the thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, and then focused on, like, witchcraft is real and they exist and they are working against you and they're evil. And
never a thing I heard. As a matter of fact, there were a couple of, like, super religious members of my childhood who were like, you can't even read fantasy because it's going to encourage whatever. Whereas a literal church bookstore sold copies of Harry Potter. Why? Because Harry Potter at its core was a story about evil triumphing, or good triumphing over evil, which was, like, a good concept. And so, like, it was that thing where it was never, like
a literal Jesus Christ metaphor, like, built right into the freaking book. So
yes. And problematic author aside, we've talked about that.
Yes. She who shall not be named.
Shame that those books just popped out of nowhere and no one knows who wrote them. It is mystery, great mystery. But the core concept of good triumphing over evil was mostly what I was raised with, which is in theory a good thing. And so I was never really told to not participate in fantasy or that it was the work of the devil. As a matter of fact, Brandon Sanderson, who wrote the Mistborn trilogy and all these things, big name author in the fantasy world, Mormon. And my sister played Dungeons and Dragons with him at BYU. Like, that is a thing they did there.
Okay.
I played D&D at SVU at my Mormon college. Like, it's not as much a taboo there. I've never once I had professors playing with us. I never once heard, this is satanic, this is evil, you're summoning spirit. Never, not once. And that's one of the reasons, right? And it's one of the reasons it shocks me when parts of the Mormon Church feel so backwards, because they seem to be doing so many things right, you know? And it gets confusing where I'm like, they were so progressive in so many ways. I've never once heard that. And then they do things like, there's a trend of Mormon girls celebrating the overturn of Roe v. Wade on TikTok, and it's the most cringe thing I've ever seen. And I'm like, well, I want to punch all of you in the faces. Like, it's that where I'm like, what the fuck is happening right now?
Yeah.
I'm struggling to justify those two pieces of this culture and upbringing, and it hurts. And And, it's stuff like that. Like, yeah. So I was never told that it was inappropriate in any way. It was just not treated like a real practice, religion, or like concept. So it was never
not
like
something to worry about.
Exactly. Like, sure, if my parents had come in and I was having a whole ass ritual, probably they would have questioned me.
Had some questions.
Had some follow-ups and some thoughts.
So the goat's blood.
So where did you get the goat? A, B, please clean it up after. C, let's talk about why it's not appropriate. And in that order, it would have been, where did this come from? Why is it on my carpet? What are you doing? That would have been the order of importance. But like they never told me video games were the devil. They never told me any of those things. Like, I grew up with a PlayStation in my house. Like none of this. And so what I hear about, like, and so I wonder sometimes, I'm like, what if I discovered this about myself when I was younger? What if I'd realized when I was younger that what I was doing was ritualistic? What if I'd realized that I was ritualizing my craft as a writer and an artist and an actor and all these things? Mm-hmm. Would it have been a problem? Would that have been another thing I had to struggle with? Would it be a thing I feel guilty about now? Because I don't. I've never felt guilty for transitioning into a witchcraft state of mind. Ever. I feel embarrassed
that you haven't had to deal with
I've
that.
Never had that guilt or shame. I've had embarrassment every now and then because, like, there are skeptics in my life and in my family. But, like, I think it's because I grew up with my grandmother on my dad's side was a practicing witch and a psychic and like a pretty big deal in her communities. And when I was younger, she hypnotized me out of my fear of the dark. And my parents let her. Like, they let her do. I asked if she could do that because I was sick of being afraid all the time. I understood at a young age that there was something I couldn't fix myself. My mom was a skeptic because things didn't work for her. My mom was a skeptic because she'd tried she had chronic migraines her whole life. She'd tried aromatherapy. She'd tried reflexology. She'd tried meditation. She had tried all these things and they kept not working for her. So she was a skeptic because they didn't work for her. She watched it work for me and she went, I'm very glad. Great. The moment lavender essential oils as aromatherapy worked for me, she bought them for me in droves. She was like, this is a thing you need. This is a thing that works for you. Great, take it. She accepted it immediately. Immediately as a fix. She was like, great, fantastic, we're good.
I dig that. It's evidence-based. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, like,
acceptance of new knowledge and information.
Yes. But, like, I was like, she never told me it wouldn't work for me. She was like, it doesn't work for me personally, but it might work for you. It's like, great, amazing, thank you for that caveat. Like, you know, and I feel like the same thing would have been held true with, like, maybe it's because I grew up in theater. Maybe it's because my church had a community theater program and there's a little bit of ritual there. There's superstition and there's whatever and there's patterns and habits and all of that is witchcraft. Everything about sports and theater is based in witchcraft. It just is. I studied this and I have a lot of thoughts. But so yeah, I don't think it would be a huge problem. But yeah, it's a little like, I can't tell my older brother, like, yeah, I'm a practicing witch and have him not scoff at me. But, like, that's because he scoffs at a lot of the ridiculous things I do. And I've gotten over it.
Better than holy water or
exactly.
fire.
Exactly. I'll take scoffing. Scoffing's fine. I'll take the scoff. It's fine. That's fine with me. I'm good.
So, I'm curious, after that, when you were embracing all these new things, you were getting that, you were finding a new practice, you were connecting in community in different ways, like post Mormonism. And at what point did polyamory, like, what was that journey like? How did you move into that? That's like, it seems like that would be a big change or adjustment.
Yeah, it was. It still is. Because as I mentioned, it still feels like a trap sometimes. It still feels like a mistake. Because I've been trapped with that before. I've literally, it was used against me. It's been a bit of a shift. because my now husband brought it up before we got engaged because he felt it was one of the reasons he waited so long. I wanted to get married. It was important to me because I was sick of feeling like I was living in sin. That was a genuine thing. I still felt like by not being married, it was raising too many questions for my family, and I didn't know how to bring him home and be like, yes, this is my boyfriend of 8 years. He's here, he's staying in the room with me. Like, I didn't know how to cross that bridge. And I was very sick of it. So in a lot of ways, we got married for practical reasons and for guilt-based religious reasons. But he brought up before we got engaged, he was like, I think I'm polyamorous. And I don't want to make you feel trapped. And I don't want to make you feel like I'm marrying you and then being like, great, let's see other people. So like, before we get engaged, I want to talk about this. And I was like, you know what? It makes you happy? Go. I wasn't planning on participating. In fact, I only said yes in the first place because Cody has severe depression. Like I've lost both parents to cancer, and I have begun referring to Cody's depression as terminal depression. Because his bad days behave exactly the same as my parents' bad chemotherapy days. Where all you can do is survive and exist. Nothing else. And as with most terminal cancer patients, one of two things will happen. Cancer will take you, or you will outlive it and be in remission and die of natural causes. But you will always have cancer that has the potential to kill you. That is how bad Cody's depression is. It could take him someday, or he could outlive it. But he will always have it as this thing that could kill him.
Yeah.
And having watched at that point both parents pass away, I knew two things. I knew, one, I didn't want either of us to have to be alone. Me, if I get either of the cancers that killed them. Or him, if he loses me to cancer. Or me, if I lose him to depression. And two, I was willing to do anything to make sure his depression didn't win. If this is a thing that it takes to make him happy, I was willing to do it. So it was a bit of an adjustment for me to pull myself out of a mindset that had so been focused still on I am only complete and whole if I am married. And it took meeting my long-distance partner. Again, I haven't asked him if it's appropriate to use his name, so I'm just going to, that one. It took me meeting him for me to go, oh, maybe I'm going to participate. Maybe I need someone. Maybe I can't do it all myself. Okay. And the shift into full acceptance of the lifestyle literally only came because I found someone who could help with the burden of me existing. As a person who was trying to heal and a person who was trying to find the best version of myself. And this new guy knew and understood different parts of me than my husband did. And that was fascinating to me. And what's interesting is so many people I know who have left the church have found themselves in polyamorous situations. Because the shift is, especially for those of us who don't have families or kids yet, or aren't planning on it, but you grew up with such a family-centric mentality, we're looking for families. We're looking for ways to make a big family.
Interesting.
In an alternative way.
I love that.
Right? Like, he is my family. And in a very real way. And I genuinely hope that my husband finds a partner who is his family at some point. I want that for him. I want him to be able to find that. But it's very interesting to me, the shift from, oh, your whole job in life is to take care of just each other, to, I'm a more whole person even having multiple people take care of each other than I was when it was just me and my first husband. I'm a more complete version of me like this. But it's still one of those things, and I'm like, I've accepted that my family probably knows and or will know soon Don't know that I can bring him home to meet anybody. Don't know that I can take the poly partner home. Oh, not sure how that'll work. But like, but it's easier and easier to accept as my choice and part of my life because I'm healthier and happier in a lot of ways than I was my first marriage to just the one person. And it's weird. It's just weird. There's still these twinges of guilt for the stigma of the type of relationship, specifically coming from a staunchly religious upbringing. It's weird. It's weird, honestly. And what's weirdest to me is there's a history in the church of polygamy. And it feels like, again, with the moral relativism and the ethical relativism, if the prophet came out tomorrow and said, hey, polygamy is now the commandment and the standard again, people would be on board. I would no longer be considered a sinner. But because it's not, everything I'm doing is considered inappropriate. Mm. And I'm like, all right, well, that's hard to wrap your brain around. And it kind of sucks because I would very much like to introduce my new partner to people. I adore him. Like, I'd love to be able to be more myself at family gatherings. Sucks not being able to, honestly. But I do that partially to make them comfortable. Because the relationships I do still have with my family are important enough to me to not just throw a firebomb into on purpose,
It's hard when your full true self is considered a firebomb.
Correct. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask about creativity and your work as a creator, as an artist, as an actor, as a writer.
Chaos.
And and how that intersects with your healing.
Oh God. Oh yeah. So I grew up around creative folk. My uncle was an author, my mom worked for him, my dad is a painter. Did glorious work. Oh man. I always wanted to be everything. I wanted to be everything in the world. And I settled into the arts. It's like I've been performing my whole life. I've been on stage since I was 3 years old. But I really started focusing in on performing as a career when I was like 11. Everything else kind of shifted away, and I had found myself doing these shows, and they were the highlight of my life. And and the weird thing is, because I grew up in an area where and a lifestyle where the fact that Mormons don't get like piercings or tattoos or color their hair wild colors means you're actually very castable as an actor. Ridiculously castable, in fact. When I was hired at the Disney College program, they full on admitted that they like hiring Mormons because they already fit in with Disney look. They don't have tattoos, they don't have piercings, they're not going to show up to work drunk. For me, my shift into accepting who I am as it aligns with the arts has been very difficult. Because I know by getting tattoos, I'm ruling myself out of certain roles. By becoming who I am, I have cut off certain parts of the arts that I was always waiting around for. And that's very hard. Because I have this and I'm planning on getting more, which means I have accepted that I'm never going to be a Disney princess. I have accepted that I'm never going to be a certain role at the parks because they can't hire me with this.
They don't allow cover-up stuff?
They do. It's just a lot harder to manage, and they tend to still not cast people around it because they have to provide the cover-up then, and it's expensive.
Oh, okay.
Because if they're asking me to cover something up, they legally have to provide that tool.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So in my, as I learn more and more about myself, my books have kind of shifted to reflect a lot of that. My self-insert character has grown more than I thought, and is going to be her own books now. And I read the version of her she was at the beginning of this series, who was just supposed to be the love interest for the main character, and instead has spawned a whole fan base, a life of her own, a destiny of her own. And looking at the timeline of when I wrote these, I didn't realize it at the time. I did not realize that's what I was doing. I did not realize that I was writing Lai's journey to reflect my own. That I changed her character path and arc and goals and intentions as I realized I wanted different things out of my life. Or I was more accepting of changing, or I was whatever. It was not conscious. It was not a conscious decision. The parts of myself I pour into my art are never on purpose. They show up anyway. I do not set out to put parts of myself in my work. The work just takes parts of me. I don't outline, I don't plan. I just am a conduit. And I felt like that for a long time. It's one of the reasons I talk about my writing being my craft and my art being my craft is it's because I don't plan it that way. It just happens. It just comes out. The book that I was writing, in which mild spoiler alert, my self-insert character is Lai Blackroot, and her father is the pirate god Farron. And the book that I was writing when he hands over the crown to her is the book I was writing when my father died. And I didn't plan it that way. I didn't do it on purpose. It just happened.
Mom.
I did not plan that. And he passed away 4 days after I finished the book, when I was reading it to him in hospice care. And it was the most painfully poignant thing that ever happened to me in my life. Because it was the book in which I was letting her make her choices without him. Yeah. Or about to. And then all of book 4, she is kind of making these decisions on her own. And that was the first book I had to write without my dad alive, was book 4, and that was not on purpose. So instead, I think my healing does its job by itself, and my art takes things I'm not even aware of in myself and my circle and my universe and just puts them.
Yeah.
And it's also why book 5 is so hard for me to finish, is because I'm wrapping up this part of my story that has been such a big part of my life for the past 15 years. Because I started writing that book 1 in high school. And it has been so connected to the parts of my life that changed, and has reflected the parts of my life that changed. My entire metamorphosis is in those pages. And it's very hard to wrap that up and move forward into the next phase of my life, where I am my most authentic self, where these are done, where the me that I was when I started writing them with both parents finishes writing them with neither. It's hard. It's weird. The version of the book that book 1 is and ended up being, I started writing when I was brand new, a newlywed. I had changed the whole story around, and those timelines line up perfectly in a weird way. So I'm not quite sure what to do with myself when that's over. I'm hoping the art will tell me, because I don't fucking know. Which is surreal and bizarre to think about, that I'm often not in control of my own art. It just kind of does. I am the pen. I'm just the pen. No idea what ink is coming out. No fucking clue. Like,
no, I get it.
So, yeah,
I've been the brush.
Yeah, exactly. But because I am an emotion-based writer, I can't force myself to write when I'm really depressed. My emotions are my art a lot of the time, and they come out on the page, and I can't force myself to write through bad depression. Mm-hmm. Can't force myself to create when I'm in a dark, dark place. It's one of the reasons I started ritualizing my preparing to write. The candles, the music being just so, doing a tarot read before, how I arrange my desk, like all of these things. My desk became my altar, because this is where I needed my magic to work. Mm-hmm. Was at the desk, because I couldn't be in a bad place when I sat down to try and write. And
it makes sense. Like, yeah. If it's a conduit like experience, exactly. Like making sure that
exactly. And
making sure the line is clear.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And it's been a weird journey to figure out, honestly. And to discover for myself how to make that line clear, how to make that conduit work when and where I can, because I can't always force it, but sometimes I can make sure I'm in a right headspace. Or I can try. But it's weird. It's yeah, it's like I said, I regularly will take a step back and see the trauma and healing path unfold in the books, without any of the readers necessarily knowing that's what I'm going through, or being aware of the situation behind it. Not being aware of myself sometimes, and then going, oh shit, like, what did I do? Why did I do that? Interesting. Cool. Great. Awesome. So
that's beautiful. Thank you for speaking about that.
Listen, I talk. It's like all I do.
You do a lot. So it's good to hear you talk about it. I'd love to know about how the autism diagnosis has intersected with your healing.
Oh my God.
What that journey has been like.
Painful.
Unmasking and stuff like that.
Painful. So you know how you gaslight yourself?
Oh yeah.
Just full stop. You know how you gaslight yourself? Yeah, it's super fun. The feeling of, well, if I had known this earlier, would I have blank? If I had known this earlier, could I have thus and such? You know, there's so much of that. The autism diagnosis, it was actually, it was Sway who said the most helpful thing in the world. And I clung to that desperately, because I was texting him as, like, I'm getting paperwork. And I was like, yeah, it's official. It's this. I feel broken. I understand if people don't want to deal with me now. And he was like, you're still who you were. You're just a little more defined. And I broke. Finding ways to fit who I am, or my journey, or how I have to heal, or how I reacted to things in the past, within this new definition that I'm building, because everyone's definition of autism for themselves is different. There's a reason it's called a spectrum. There's a reason it's not just one thing. Mm-hmm. There's a reason it's more complicated than, like, asthma, which has, like, 3 variants, but that's it. Like, pretty much, here's, like, 4 different triggers for most asthma, and then you're good. The same 2 medications in these inhalers will work for almost everyone with asthma. Autism is not that. And then I also have the comorbidity with, I also have ADHD. Yay. I need a structure. A structure will kill me. Help.
Relatable.
Right? It's awful. But I've realized, it has helped to know, as I'm healing, that I am not broken, I just didn't understand myself yet. That's been huge. Because things like trying to figure out why I still panic about sexuality things, why I still this and this and this. It's because autism teaches you to learn through one of two things: repetition and pattern, or the violation of that repetition and pattern. You learn how to fear or hate or whatever, or panic or worry when something disrupts that and your expectations are damaged. More and more I'm learning most autism triggers for a lot of people in adulthood are things that don't seem traumatic to anyone else, but that traumatized their idea of the world when they were younger. And for me, a lot of how I interacted with sex was both of those things at the same time. It was an establishment of a pattern that was also traumatic. And it's hard enough to break down now. I feel like it would be even harder if I didn't realize that I was autistic, and that if I didn't have an ironclad medical reason to be struggling so much right now. I would have broken down a long time ago and just given up. As it is now, I struggle with a lot of things that I have to now doubly clarify with my husband. I'm like, hi, I'm having a communication issue. I'm gonna need this to be clearer. It's caused a lot of struggle. But it would have caused so much more if I didn't know, and I was just not sure why I was not understanding. If I was just lost and felt stupid or broken or whatever, like I did for so long before.
And none of the needs were understood or validated.
Exactly. Knowing and accepting and understanding that you have different boundaries, walls, or needs than somebody else is liberating and painful. It's exhausting knowing you have to work twice as hard, 3 times as hard, 5 times as hard as everybody else to do normal things. But it's validating to know you are not broken for struggling. Other people go through this too. Other people also struggle with, hey, I don't understand this basic human concept. I'm so sorry. It's not wrong. It happens to a lot of people. For a long time, if you don't know this about yourself and you just feel like, hey, I'm stupid. Like, I'm not listening hard enough. I'm not paying attention hard enough. I'm not smart enough to deal with human conversations. That's so much harder to deal with than, nope, autism. And it's mean to me sometimes. I can beat it. I just have to, like, work a lot harder to get through. It's for the D&D fans, it's mental and emotional rough terrain. I can still get through it. I just have to take twice as long. Because when you're in D&D, your movement speed is 30 feet, right? But if you're in rough terrain, it's only 15. I feel like autism is mental and emotional rough terrain sometimes. I will get across it in this communication. We will be able to have this conversation. I will get where I need to go. It's just going to take me a little longer. It's a little harder for me than this ranger who ignores rough terrain by default. Like, that's... So it has helped.
I love that.
Thank you. Hi, I'm a nerd. It's one of those things where it's like, hey, hello, I'm allowed to struggle a little bit here. I'm allowed to struggle. And I consider myself lucky that I grew up the way I did, because, like, whereas my family struggled with understanding that, like, maybe their kids needed therapy, because it was just not a thing that was talked about or dealt with. I grew up with my mom having chronic migraines, right? And so she had special needs when she was having a bad migraine. I grew up as a small child being taught, you are quiet when your mother is sick. You turn the door handle to close a door. You don't just slam the door. Mm-hmm. You leave the TV on at like 5. It was non-negotiable. You are quiet. Because it'll make it so much worse if you're not. And so I learned to be very respectful of people who were sick. really early on. I learned as an adult that not everyone had that. I remember my ex-husband's, our nieces and nephews, like, I tried to tell them, we were at their place for Thanksgiving one year, and I was like, I am sick. I need you to let me sleep. And these children who were the same age I was when I was learning to be respectful of sick people just came barging in the room anyway, and I was like, what the hell is wrong with these children? Oh, your parents they don't have discipline the same. They don't think that sickness is a real reason to be gentle with someone. Understood. You all suck. I learned that more and more, that they just didn't think that illness was a real reason to, like, go easy on someone.
Yeah.
I was like, it's horrible.
Wild.
But, like, I've had to start kind of reminding myself. It's harder to do when it's you. But I've had to remind myself that, okay, how would I have treated my mom if she was having a bad sick day? How would I have treated my dad if he was having a bad sick day? Okay, I have to be allowed to, even if it's in my head.
Yeah.
Even if it's an autism day where I'm very low functioning that day.
Yeah.
And high struggling that day.
You
I have to treat it.
Grace.
Exactly. I have to treat it with that, like the migraine. I have to close doors a little gentler. I have to make it darker in the room. I have to deal with it. Like, I have to treat it seriously.
Yeah.
And that's a hard lesson to learn, but I'm also really glad that it's happening at this phase in my healing journey, because I'm learning the two things simultaneously, which means hopefully on the other side of it, I will come out with good safety measures in place for future trauma. Because weirdly, having to learn them both at once, they're going hand in hand in a weird way, where I'm associating my healing with learning the autistic ins and outs. I'm not learning them separately. I'm learning they have to do with each other because they do. I'm not going to process information the same as everybody else. I'm not going to process emotional trauma the same because I translate emotional pain as physical pain. It is a sensory disorder. It actually happens that way.
Yeah.
I can be in pain physically when someone yells at me.
Yeah.
Without them ever touching me. That was actually a thing that my husband and I got into once before I knew the diagnosis, so I didn't know how to explain it to him. And I went months later and I explained, oh my God, this is why this is happening. But like, neither of us knew, and it caused this big problem where he was mad and in my space and angry. And he has never laid a hand on me, not once. Never even come close. I am not afraid of him hitting me. I'm not afraid of him ever becoming abusive. But I was responding as though I was. I was responding as though I thought he was going to hit me. And it broke his heart. And it scared me because I didn't understand why I was doing that. And months later, I'm delving deeper and deeper into this autism diagnosis and doing research on my own and realizing that is a common thing for people with autism to translate, again, emotional trauma as physical trauma. And I like ran up to him. I'm like, babe, I figured it out. He's like, what? I was like, why I shy away when you yell? It's not because I'm afraid of getting hit. It's because this. And he was like, huh. Like, and he adjusted. He goes out of his way to not raise his voice because he knows it physically hurts me. And he's
like blew my mind.
Can't do it. He's like, can't do it.
Same thing happens to me, and I hadn't made that like I was relating it just entirely to PTSD stuff, but there is like a physical like response thing. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, and autistic responses behave differently because that's one of the problems with it as a disorder. Is it is a sensory disorder. We process the senses differently. They get mixed up. Yeah. So it's, for instance, why you should never, like, when you're a kid and your parents try to pressure you to do something you're afraid of, right? Autistic children process fear as pain. They're in physical pain when they're afraid. But you don't know that because they're not actually being touched, and they don't know how to explain it to you. They don't know how to explain that they are in physical pain being up high or going too fast or being in a room with the snakes or whatever, like whatever their fear is. That's something you can explain when you're that young and you don't understand it yourself. You just know that you're not okay. And I just knew I wasn't okay. And I didn't know why. I was like, he's never hit me. He's never even come close. This is not a problem with him. I'm not worried about this. I'm not even having any flashbacks from other men. Like, I've been emotionally abused in a lot of ways. Haven't really been hit, like, but I was reacting like I was. I was reacting as though I thought I was about to be smacked.
Mm-hmm.
It took me forever to figure out why. I was like, oh my god. So, like, that was enlightening for me. And it's helped me break down a lot of other stuff. So, like, again, I'm grateful the healing journeys are kind of intertwining because I'm rediscovering myself anyway for the autism reasons. But rediscovering those healing parts of myself as I break down a lot of these barriers, I'm hoping the fact that they're going hand in hand means they'll both be stronger together in the future, you know? That's the hope. It's like when you're raised bilingual and then you spend your whole life being able to speak both languages. Like, I'm hoping that I'm practicing emotional bilingualness. You know? One of the things I was talking about before we got started with all this was that the idea that that purity culture causes too many unknown unknowns, right? Like, it's too many learning gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true of more parts of our lives than we realize. Because, like with the autism diagnosis, if you're raised in a society where it is not acceptable to talk about your meltdowns or to have them, and instead you're just taught to mask them instead of delving into maybe why you're having them,
Mm-hmm.
it causes these gaps in knowledge and emotional knowledge and how to function as a person. You are taught how to function within society instead of how to function as a human. Two very different things. I think that needs to be, I think we need to just, as a people, figure out ways around that. Figure out ways to be more open about the things that are going on in our lives. Good, bad, whatever. Because so many of these problems could have been solved if, or might never have happened to me or to others, if we were allowed to be more honest. If we were allowed to acknowledge, hey, this thing is happening that makes me uncomfortable. Is that allowed to happen? Hey, I'm having a freak out. I don't know why. Please someone help me through it. Please someone help me break it down. Instead of any of these things, questions, doubts, anything being seen as signs of weakness. Because they're constantly seen as signs of weakness. Having to go to therapy is seen as a sign of weakness. Having to go to a doctor, having to be on antidepressants, having to be on any of these things is seen as a sign of a weakness. In both sexes, but especially in men. And I think being able to talk about the reality of your own personal situation and journey without fear of judgment or repercussion or shame would fix a lot of the world, honestly. Yeah. Because I cannot imagine how much further along in life I would be if I'd known these things about myself 10 years ago. 5 years ago. Can't imagine. And genuinely, I think the fewer emotional and mental learning gaps that people can garnish in life, the better. Like honestly, because but it can't be. But the bottom line is, it cannot be all down to people's parents. We as a society need to set that up.
Yeah,
because
well said.
Because again, my parents were really good at what they did, but even they didn't know what I was or was not picking up at school. And I got really lucky. There are too many parents out there who are genuinely neglectful or abusive, who society has not set up children raised in those lives for success. Mm-hmm. Because when church and school are the places you're learning, and they hide all these things away, mm-hmm. It makes it almost impossible for those people not to be abused.
Yeah.
Or taken advantage of, or put in dangerous situations.
Yeah.
And that is unacceptable to me. The number of people currently with the state of the world who are arguing, well, their parents should just this, that who have ceased to acknowledge that maybe there are some home lives that suck. It's the same argument I saw back when school lunches were an argument, and it's, well, how hard is it to make a sandwich for your kid? You're assuming that you're assuming that every parent wants to take care of their kid. They don't.
It's a massive assumption. Yeah.
Yes, because you take care of your child doesn't mean every parent does.
Yeah.
Kids go to school hungry because their parents are terrible people every fucking day. And school is supposed to be a safe place. Or just
don't have the fucking resources.
Exactly.
Like, maybe you don't have fucking bread. Like, that's real.
And the fact that free school lunches is a hot take. The fact that school lunch should be free when you're requiring students legally to go to school for 8 hours a day, you should also fucking feed them.
Why wouldn't you feed them? What the fuck?
That shouldn't be a controversial take.
It's wild.
That should not be controversy.
Oh my gosh.
I hate it. So things like that. I just feel like setting people up societally to make their own choices and become the best versions of themselves bothers me that that's still an argument I have to have. If that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. Thank you for talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
So I usually kind of close things up asking you, is there anything that you would like to say to the survivors that are listening? Or the ex-Mormons that are listening.
Oh God, yes. Come find me. Let's chat. But genuinely, for me, the biggest thing is neither grief nor healing are linear. And you're allowed to recover in whatever shape or style or wibbly wobbly line that you need. Whether your healing journey is a circle or a triangle or just a knot of string, it doesn't matter. What matters is you know what you need, and don't let people tell you just to get over it. Don't let people tell you, oh, it's time to move on. Don't let yourself tell you that either, because it's not fair. It's not fair to you. Like I said, I didn't realize half of this trauma had happened to me for 10 years. And if I had tried to shut that down, I would be in such a worse place right now. So, it sucks. Healing's timeline is sometimes wild and raw and inconvenient, but that doesn't mean it doesn't need to happen. So, yeah. But seriously, ex-Mos out there, come find me. Come chat. Let's hang. Let's talk about some stuff. I have so much more about that specifically.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, for sharing so much of your life, of who you are and your experiences and your insight. And thank you so much for being you and for creating the spaces that you do, both in like the work that you do in the world, and then the community that you've been building on Twitch is so wonderful. Like, if you haven't checked out Chaos Pixie Magic on Twitch, I really hope you will. It's a beautiful place to be, and it's such good vibes. And I just so deeply appreciate you, and I'm so honored that you would join me. I love that this is like very much is this like a Twitch thing? Like
I don't even know where it started.
I don't know either, but I love it.
I love it so much. But I'm honored that you would ask. Honestly, again, I've gaslit myself into thinking for a long time, like I said, that my trauma isn't real, or that doesn't deserve to be talked about, and that I don't deserve to have a space to heal or talk because the other people have it worse, kind of thing. So thank you for.
We all do that. Also, like I haven't met a survivor yet that hasn't done that, and it's like,
ridiculous.
Who is this who is this survivor that has had the worst like experience that we are all looking to, like,
for being like, do I have your permission to be sad?
To be sad. Yes, it matters. It matters. It all matters, and it's all part of the same problem, and we can only start fixing it when we acknowledge that this matters and that it's fucked up and we need to fix it. Like, and that's a part of what we're doing here, and I'm so honored that you would come here and do this work for me, because I know that this takes a lot of energy as well.
Worth
this
it.
Takes a lot of spoons, and I appreciate your spoons.
Worth it. So worth it.
Awesome. Yay! All right. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a beautiful day.
Your heart is a muscle the size of your fist. Keep on loving, keep on fighting, and hold on, and hold on. Hold on for your life, for your life, for your life. Your heart is a muscle the size of your fist. Keep on loving, keep on fighting, and hold on, and hold on. Hold on for your life.